Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I moved into this house 3 weeks ago. I'd never heard weird noises in the middle of the night before. I'd never worried about a single helium balloon shifting places on its own. Now I can't get either of those things out of my mind. Every evening I catch myself looking up at the ceiling, waiting to hear that faint creak or scrape. I feel uneasy whenever I glance at the attic door in the hallway. And it all began because of a simple balloon. I'm 33 years old. My wife and I rented this old 2-story house because it had enough space and the rent was cheap. The building has a narrow driveway on the side, chipped paint on the front porch, and some old shingles on the roof that look like they've seen better days. Inside, the hardwood floors squeak in random spots and a few door frames are warped from age. There's also a small door in the hallway that leads to the attic. It's a pull-down ladder type. Until last week, I never felt curious about it. It's cramped, dusty, and I never had any reason to go up there. I figured we'd store a few holiday decorations in that space eventually, but I kept putting it off. We just moved in, and we have a lot of other boxes to unpack. My wife is usually the organized one. She makes sure we handle repairs right away and keep our stuff in order, but she also respects that I hate crawling around in old attics. She didn't push me to explore. We both left that part of the house alone. We set up our bedroom in the largest room downstairs because the master bedroom upstairs has a weird smell. It's not rotting or anything like that, just a stale odor that I can't quite place. It might be from old wallpaper glue or mildew. Whatever it is, we decided we liked the downstairs bedroom better, so we sleep there. We had a small celebratory dinner the weekend after we moved in. We invited my parents over to check out the place. My wife bought a small helium balloon that said "Congrats" on it. We tied it to the back of a chair in the dining room. It was just a fun little touch for the dinner. A few days later, after my parents had gone home and we'd cleaned up, I noticed that balloon was still floating near the ceiling. My wife joked about how helium balloons always seem to last longer than we expect. She ended up removing the ribbon and letting it drift around in the hallway. She thought it was funny to watch it bump against the ceiling whenever we walked by. That balloon became a sort of random decoration in the corridor. I'd see it near the bathroom door sometimes, then it would drift toward our bedroom door later. We don't have any ceiling fans in that area and the windows stay closed because the nights get chilly. But helium balloons move around, right? Even the slightest changes in air pressure can nudge them along. I didn't think much of it. Then came the first odd event. I woke up early on a Monday. I got ready for work, walked into the hallway, and noticed the balloon was missing. I checked around the living room and kitchen. Nothing. It wasn't in our bedroom or the downstairs closet. I shrugged and figured the balloon might have deflated somewhere, maybe got stuck under a table. I didn't have time to keep searching, so I left for work. That evening when I got home, I was in a rush to get dinner started. I didn't even remember the balloon until later. I was taking some stuff upstairs to put in the spare bedroom. When I got up there, I saw that attic door in the hallway. I paused. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Then, as I started walking away, I noticed something floating in the attic's small overhead opening. I had never opened that hatch, but I could see a faint shape of something round near the top of the pull-down stairs. I stood there, staring. My heart started beating a little faster. I've never been a superstitious person, but it made no sense for a helium balloon to find its way up there. I grabbed a flashlight from the spare bedroom, pulled the attic door down, and slowly climbed the foldable ladder. Sure enough, in the center of the dusty, dark space, that balloon was hovering. The attic smelled musty, like old cardboard. I saw a few spider webs in the corners. The wooden beams were uneven. I had to crouch to avoid hitting my head. The floor up there is just thin plywood laid over the joists. There was no wind, no open window. The balloon was still inflated, drifting in the center of the room. I looked around. The only source of light came from the small bulb I switched on near the entrance. There's no other exit, no open vents, nothing. I stood there for at least a minute, confused. I finally reached out and grabbed the balloon string. My heart thumped in my chest. I checked if maybe my wife had moved it up there for some reason. It seemed like a bizarre joke, but I couldn't think of anything else. I gently brought the balloon back down into the hallway and called for my wife. She was in the kitchen, putting away groceries. I asked her if she had gone up to the attic. She gave me a blank stare and said no. She even asked me, why would I bother with that dusty place? I believed her. She's not a fan of the attic any more than I am. Plus, she was busy earlier, and I was at work. She said she'd been home the whole afternoon, but she insisted she never touched that balloon. I felt uneasy, but I tried to laugh it off. I said maybe a draft carried it upstairs, though in the back of my mind, I knew that made no sense. The attic door had been closed the entire time. We ended the night watching TV. I placed the balloon in the living room. I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I fell asleep that night without any strange noises. But around 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. I heard what sounded like soft footsteps above me. Just a few light thumps, followed by silence. Then maybe 20 seconds later, a few more. I froze in bed, breathing quietly. My wife was beside me, sleeping soundly. The footsteps, or whatever that noise was, lasted maybe a minute in total. Then it stopped. I felt my pulse racing. My throat went dry. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling or maybe some old pipes, but it sounded exactly like someone walking back and forth. I didn't have the courage to go check that night. I just stayed in bed, eyes open, waiting to hear the noise again. It never came. In the morning, I felt tense. I told my wife about it. She said, "Houses like this make noises, especially when the temperature changes." She suggested we call the landlord if it continued. I agreed, but I still felt uneasy. My mind kept jumping back to the attic incident with the balloon. 2 days passed. I heard the same noise again on the second night around the same time, light footsteps above my head. I tried to be brave, but my heart pounded so hard that my hands shook. I got out of bed, stepped into the hallway, and looked up at the attic door. Everything was dark and quiet. My wife came out behind me, half awake, asking what I was doing. I told her I heard something. She listened for a few seconds, but we heard nothing else. She said I was too wound up about the balloon and told me to go back to bed. I decided to check the attic the next day. I wanted to look for a loose board, or maybe an animal. Sometimes raccoons or squirrels get inside old houses. It was around 8 p.m. when I felt ready to do it. My wife was in the living room, reading. I didn't want to drag her into the mess if I was just being paranoid. I grabbed a flashlight again, climbed up those squeaky steps, and stuck my head into the attic. The air felt thick and stale. The single bulb lit up the space just enough to see the floor. At first, everything looked the same as before. Some dust, a couple of discarded boxes from the previous tenants, a few dead bugs. Then I noticed something near one of the beams. I walked over carefully, stepping on the wooden planks. My stomach turned. The helium balloon was there again. This time, it wasn't just floating around. It was tied to an old piece of wire that was sticking out of the beam. I could see the balloon string looped around that rusty wire, as if someone had secured it there. There was just enough slack for the balloon to move a bit, but it was basically stuck in one spot. I stood there in disbelief. I felt a chill spread through my body. My breath became quick and shallow. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I looked back at the hatch opening. Nobody else was up there with me. My wife was downstairs, and we don't have any roommates. I wanted to say something. I wanted to call out, but I couldn't form words. My mind was racing. Who would tie a balloon to that wire? Why would anyone do that? I forced myself to approach it. I grabbed the string and tried to pull it loose, but it was knotted around the wire. Someone had deliberately twisted it around several times. I ended up yanking on the balloon until the string snapped. My hand was shaking. The balloon bobbed next to me, still fully inflated. I wanted to find some logical explanation. Maybe the wire got caught accidentally when the balloon drifted up there, but that would have taken some precision. It was a tight knot. I left the attic as fast as I could without running. I didn't want to slip on the steps. Once I was back in the hallway, I shoved the attic door closed. My breathing was heavy, and my forehead was damp with sweat. My wife came out of the living room and saw the balloon in my hand. She asked, "Why do you have that again?" I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was playing a trick on me. She insisted she didn't move it. She said she hadn't even gone near the attic since we moved in. I believed her. She doesn't lie about stuff like that. We threw the balloon in the trash right then. I grabbed scissors, deflated it, and tossed it away. I wanted to be done with it. I wanted to forget about the entire weird situation. But later that night, the noises started again. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard the same footsteps overhead. They were light, almost careful, moving back and forth. The sound continued for a couple of minutes. I got out of bed quietly and stood by the hallway, staring at the attic door again. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. My palms were sweaty. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. I thought about opening the attic, but I couldn't. I just stood there in the dark, trying to control my breathing. My mind kept picturing someone up there, someone we didn't know, maybe living in the attic. That idea was too unsettling. I felt my knees shaking. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? I think there's footsteps in my attic, but I have no proof. We've only been here a few weeks, and I didn't want to start some dramatic situation if it turned out to be a raccoon, or just the house settling. The next morning, I checked the attic in daylight. I moved a few boxes around, trying to see if there was any sign of an animal or a hidden entrance. I found nothing but dust and one old trunk with a broken lock. I opened it. It was empty, aside from some moth-eaten fabric and a small cardboard folder full of old receipts. No footprints, no droppings, no open vents or holes. No sign that anyone was staying in there. For the next few days, I kept quiet. I tried to act normal. I went to work, came home, had dinner. My wife and I talked about normal things, like groceries and errands. But at night, I became hyper-aware of every noise. The house has its usual creaks and pops when the plumbing activates or when the wood expands. But these footsteps are different. They come in a measured pattern, 2 or 3 steps. Pause, then 2 or 3 more. I once tried to record the sound with my phone. I woke up at around 3 in the morning and heard the steps. I grabbed my phone and hit record, but by the time I stepped into the hallway, the noise stopped again. My phone just captured my breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator. We have a landlord, but he's not the most responsive person. He told us the house is old and that we should expect a few quirks. He said the attic doesn't have any official ventilation except the small vents near the roof, and those are supposedly screened off. He asked if we saw any evidence of rodents. I said no. Then he told me, "Well, if you find anything, let me know." That was the end of that conversation. Now, every evening, I check the attic door. It's always closed. Sometimes I stand there, shining my flashlight around the edges, looking for cracks or anything. Nothing. My wife says I'm letting it get to me. Maybe I am, but I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong up there. I tried to ignore it, but last night, I heard the footsteps again, clear as day. I even felt the vibration through the ceiling when I put my hand against the wall. There's another detail that bothers me. I'm sure I closed the trunk in the attic properly after I searched it. Yesterday, I went back up to see if anything had changed, and the trunk was open. The lid was raised all the way up. The receipts and the fabric inside looked disturbed, like someone had rifled through them. I'm not imagining that. I know what I saw. I keep wondering if there's a simple explanation. Maybe there's some mechanical piece in the roof that's vibrating or shifting. But that balloon incident keeps coming to mind. The balloon was moved to the attic twice and then tied to that wire. That's not the kind of thing a creaky pipe would do. The balloon is gone now, but I'm stuck with these footsteps in the open trunk. My wife thinks I'm overreacting, but she hasn't heard the steps as clearly as I have. She sleeps through most of the night. Whenever she does wake up, it goes quiet. I don't know who or what is moving around up there. I checked for hidden doors or panels, and I found nothing. There's no other way up to the attic except that hatch. I've started locking the attic hatch with a small padlock I installed. I drilled a latch into the frame just to feel safer. It might be overkill, but it gives me some peace of mind. Now when I look at that door at night, I see the lock, and I hope that if something or someone tries to come down, I'll at least hear them struggle with it. The footsteps haven't stopped, though. 2 nights ago, I heard them again. It's even more unsettling because if someone is up there, they shouldn't be able to leave. The door is locked from the outside, unless there's another hidden exit, or unless it's something else I can't explain. I'm still trying to handle this rationally. My wife suggested we hire a home inspector to do a thorough check of the attic. I think I'll do that. If they find evidence of an animal or an opening, then at least we'll have answers. If not, I don't know. I keep replaying the balloon scenario in my head. The moment I found it up there the first time, it made no sense. Then seeing it tied to a wire made me feel sick. I can't forget that feeling of standing in the attic, seeing a simple helium balloon secured in place by a knot I didn't make. At this point, we're considering moving out when our short-term lease is up. This house has too many strange things going on. The rent was cheap, but I don't think it's worth the stress. My wife is more relaxed about it, but she sees how it affects me. I've been losing sleep. I walk around with a knot in my stomach, half expecting to hear those steps every time I drift off to sleep. Sometimes I lie in bed, listening so hard that every tiny creak makes me jump. I don't know who or what went up there with that balloon. I don't know why it was positioned right in the middle of the floor, or why it got tied to that wire. I don't know why the trunk in the attic keeps ending up open. All I know is that the footsteps haven't stopped, and I can't pretend they're just in my head. If this continues, I'll probably call a professional and have them check every inch of the attic and the roof. Maybe they'll find a gap or a hidden hatch that leads outside. I want to believe that's all it is. Until then, every night I stare at the ceiling and wait. Even when I'm exhausted, my mind refuses to shut down. I picture an intruder or some stranger living up there. Then I picture the balloon drifting on its own, moving to the attic without explanation. I can't decide which scenario is worse. For now, I'm just dealing with the situation the best I can. But I'm ready for some answers. I'm tired of feeling tense in my own home. This was supposed to be our fresh start, but instead it's become the place where I lie awake at night, listening for footsteps that may or may not belong to someone I never see. I got the call to handle my cousin's house about 2 weeks after he passed. My aunt handed me the keys and said, "Just make sure everything's sorted. We'll decide later what to sell." I agreed because I was the closest person he had around our hometown. I wasn't excited about the job, but nobody else wanted to do it. I told myself I'd just go in, clean, box things up, and stay focused on the task. At first, I thought it would be a simple chore. I had no idea how uneasy I would feel in that house. When I first opened the front door, I noticed the living room felt stale. I smelled dust and old furniture right away. The floors were laminate and the windows had thin curtains that didn't block much light. I walked to the kitchen and saw a small table, a few chairs, and some unwashed cups in the sink. My cousin lived alone, so I wasn't expecting a mess, but I still found random items scattered around. There was a layer of dust on the counter near the fridge. I grabbed a rag and wiped it off without thinking much about it. I spent that first day clearing out the living room and kitchen. I sorted through piles of mail, bills, and some notes he had left on the table. When it got close to sunset, I went to the bedroom where he used to sleep. The house was one story, but his room was tucked away at the back, right next to a door that opened to the backyard. It felt separate from the rest of the place. The moment I walked into his bedroom, I caught a whiff of a familiar scent. It was the cologne he always wore. I stopped and looked around for a source. His closet was empty because my family had already removed most of his clothes. There was an open drawer in the dresser, but there was nothing inside except some socks. I thought maybe the smell clung to the walls or the bedding. I shrugged it off and kept working. On my way out that night, I felt a strong urge to check the backyard door. It was locked, but the handle felt cold. I looked through the glass. The backyard was dark, with an old clothesline and a few potted plants that had dried up. I remember feeling a chill, even though the night wasn't that cold. I turned off the bedroom light and left. I went back a few days later with boxes and tape, determined to finish packing up the stuff in the living room and start on the bedroom. My plan was to get in, do my work, and be gone by mid-afternoon. By late morning, I had taped up a few boxes of his books, some old DVDs, and a set of photo albums. The bedroom, though, still bothered me. That same cologne smell came back every time I walked in, and it seemed to pop up out of nowhere. I'd enter the room, smell nothing at first, and then suddenly get a strong wave of it. It vanished just as fast as it arrived. Around noon, I was standing in the bedroom with a box in my arms, trying to figure out what else to collect. I heard a loud slam behind me. It made my shoulders tense up. I spun around and saw the backyard door shaking. The doorknob rattled for a second like someone was banging on it from outside. I put the box down and rushed over. I pressed my ear to the door. I didn't hear anything except my own breathing. I flung the door open. Nothing but the same empty yard. The clothesline stood there. No wind, no movement. I was on edge after that. I tried to keep busy in the house to calm my nerves. I convinced myself it must have been a draft or something with the hinges. But the windows were closed, and I hadn't felt any breeze all day. Still, I tried to ignore it and moved on. I sealed another box and brought it to the living room. Then I did a second sweep of the kitchen to look for anything worth keeping. While sorting old pans and plates, I kept glancing toward the bedroom door, half expecting it to slam or something else to happen. When evening came, I locked up and went home. That night, I slept restlessly. At about 3 a.m, I had a short, vivid dream. My cousin was standing in the bedroom next to the open closet. He looked at me and said, "Take care in there, watch yourself." I jolted awake, heart pounding. My shirt was damp from sweat. I realized my breathing was shallow and I felt my stomach tighten. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just stress from dealing with his belongings. I laid awake for at least an hour, though, replaying his words in my head. The next day, I arrived at the house with the dream fresh in my mind. I tried to act normal, but I felt an anxious twist in my gut the entire time. I walked in and immediately checked the bedroom doorknob. It was fine. I flicked on the light. Nothing unusual. The cologne smell wasn't there at first. I started boxing up some old papers from his desk. Most were receipts or letters. At one point, I found a stack of greeting cards he never opened. I set those aside. About an hour later, I stood by the closet. I pulled the door open and spotted a few coats hanging, things the family must have missed. I reached in to grab them and I froze. The cologne scent hit me hard. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I dropped the coats on the floor and stepped back. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I wondered if there was a bottle of the stuff hidden in the closet. I checked the top shelf, the floor, behind the coats. Nothing. I picked up the coats, quickly shoved them into a box and taped it shut. My hands were shaking and my throat felt tight. I wanted to leave right then, but I still had more to pack. I made a deal with myself. Finish this room, then go. I glanced at the backyard door. I kept expecting it to shake or slam again. I walked over and tested the knob. It was solid. No movement. I stared through the glass. The backyard was silent. When I finally finished boxing up the clothes and random items, I stacked the boxes in the living room. I decided to mop the bedroom floor to get rid of dust and footprints. I filled a bucket with water in the kitchen. While mopping, I noticed the baseboards needed a wipe down. I crouched near the door that led outside, scrubbing a bit of dirt. At that moment, I heard a soft knock on the other side of the door. It wasn't loud or forceful, just 2 light taps. I froze in place, holding the wet rag. I tried to breathe as quietly as possible. The knock came again, 2 taps. I slowly stood up and put my hand on the knob. My heart was pounding. I opened the door. Nobody was there. I stepped outside onto the small cement step. The yard looked empty. I felt the air on my face, which was hot from adrenaline. I turned around, locked the door again, and walked out of the bedroom. I decided that was enough for one day. That night, I couldn't rest. My legs felt cramped, and I paced my living room for a while, thinking about the knocks, the door slamming, and the cologne. I kept picturing my cousin standing in that dim room, telling me to be careful. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that scene. I had to open the window to get some air. My head felt heavy. I sat in my chair, telling myself that I was just spooked because of the stress, the emptiness of the house, and the memories. I tried to write down a to-do list to stay rational. I wanted to finish cleaning and put it on the market fast so I wouldn't have to step in there anymore. The next day, I arrived in the late afternoon, hoping to finish while there was still daylight. I went straight to the bedroom, determined to power through. The moment I flicked the switch, the light bulb popped and went out. It startled me. The hallway light was still on, so I left the bedroom door open to let some light spill in. I reached up to unscrew the dead bulb. My hands were shaking, and I dropped it on the floor. It didn't shatter, but it clanked and rolled near the corner. I wiped sweat off my forehead and grabbed another bulb from the kitchen drawer. When I put it in, the light worked fine, but I still felt uneasy. I tried to act normal, checking each corner of the room for items. I vacuumed the floor, wiped down the dresser, and opened the window to get some fresh air. At one point, I stepped out to grab a trash bag from the living room. When I got back, the bedroom door was closed. I hadn't closed it. I felt a jolt in my chest. I tried the knob, but it was locked from the inside. I didn't even know the door had a lock that could engage by itself. After fumbling around for a few minutes, I managed to pop it open with a small flathead screwdriver. I stepped into the bedroom and saw nothing unusual, but I felt my pulse racing. I thought about leaving again. My mind was screaming at me to just walk away. But the rest of the house was almost done, and I knew I had to finish. I grabbed the trash bag and put in a few old pillows, some random papers, and an empty shoebox. Then I went to the nightstand next to the bed. I opened the top drawer. Inside, there was a notebook, a pen, and a small pocket knife. I picked them up, and underneath was a small envelope with my name on it. I froze. It was my cousin's handwriting. I turned it over. It wasn't sealed, but it was tucked inside the drawer like he left it there on purpose. My mouth went dry. I wasn't sure if I should open it. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and decided I'd read it at home. I wrapped up my cleaning, took out the last trash bag, and locked every door. As I stood in front of the house, I stared at the windows. I felt like someone was watching me, but I couldn't see anything inside. I shook my head, got in my car, and drove away. On the way home, I kept touching the envelope in my pocket. I stopped for a soda at a gas station, hoping to calm down. The clerk asked if I was okay. I guess I looked shaken. I mumbled something about being tired. When I got home, I sat at my table and pulled out the envelope. Inside was a short note. It said, "If you're reading this, you're probably helping out like you always do. Thanks for looking after my things. Be careful in the house. I've been feeling strange vibes there lately. I don't know what it is, but watch yourself." That was it. No signature, no explanation. I leaned back in my chair, hands trembling. I felt tears welling up, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. My cousin had felt something was off in that place even before he passed. That explained his warning in my dream. Over the next week, I pushed through the rest of the cleanup. I tried not to linger in the bedroom. Every time I smelled the cologne or heard a creak, I forced myself to stay calm. I kept the windows open, hoping to chase away whatever was causing that thick atmosphere. Nothing else slammed or locked unexpectedly, but I still felt on edge. Finally, on my last day, I walked through each room, double-checking the closets and drawers. I labeled the boxes for storage or donation. The bedroom was the last place I checked. I went in, and it felt cooler than the rest of the house. I looked at the door to the backyard. I noticed it was unlocked, which was strange because I was sure I locked it before. I reached out, turned the lock, and pulled the door open one last time. The yard was empty and quiet. No movement, no sound. I closed it, locked it again, and stepped back. That's when I caught one final wave of that cologne smell. It was faint but unmistakable. My stomach twisted and I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I said out loud, "I'm done here. I'll be careful." Then I left. I haven't been back since. My family is putting the house on the market. I told them I'd give them the keys and let the realtor show it. I can't explain everything that happened. I only know that I felt my cousin's presence in that bedroom, or maybe something tied to him. Every time I smelled that cologne, it felt like a warning or a reminder. I'm just glad I got through it. I hope whoever ends up in that house feels at ease, but I doubt I'll ever step foot in that bedroom again. I still think about the door slamming, the rattling handle, and the nights I dreamed of my cousin telling me to watch myself. I don't want any more surprises. If there's something else in that place, I'll let it stay there. I'm done. I walked into that office on my first day with more excitement than caution. I'd signed the lease a week before, packed my desk supplies, set up my laptop, and checked the light fixtures. Everything seemed normal. The space had a slight odor of old paint, but I didn't think twice about it. My plan was simple: build my own accounting business, handle local clients, and stay focused on my goals. I didn't care about the history of the place. I only wanted to create a stable environment for my work. The day I got the keys, I noticed a large built-in closet with an old wooden door and a tarnished lock. I glanced at it, opened and closed it once, and then moved on. It felt like an unremarkable detail. I had no idea it would become the center of my concerns. I'm a straightforward guy. I handle numbers. I rely on logic. So when small things started happening, I chalked them up to my own stress. A few days in, I walked into the office on a Tuesday morning and saw that the closet door was cracked open. I remembered closing it before I left, but it wasn't a big deal. I figured I had forgotten. I pushed it shut and locked it out of habit, even though I had no reason to lock it. Then I sat down at my desk, powered up my laptop, and started checking emails. Within a few hours, I was buried in work, not thinking about the closet at all. Around lunchtime, I decided to go out for a quick sandwich. When I returned, I saw the door was open again. Not fully open, just a few inches. The lock was hanging loose, like someone had turned the key. I went inside and put my hand on the knob. It felt cool. The wood around it had small cracks, as if someone had forced it multiple times over the years. I stared at the old lock, but I couldn't see anything unusual. There was no scratch or sign of forced entry. I closed it gently and decided to ignore it. For the rest of that day, I worked without any distractions. When I left in the evening, I double-checked the door. It was shut. I even jiggled the handle a bit. It stayed locked, so I shrugged it off and headed home. 2 days later, I arrived and found the closet locked. That by itself wasn't strange, except I knew I hadn't locked it when I left. I usually only turn the key when I feel extra cautious. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I took out the key from my drawer and unlocked it. I saw my folders and spare boxes right where I left them. I didn't see anything missing. I dismissed the whole thing, but over time, folders started disappearing. At first, I thought I was just misplacing them. I'd look for a file labeled Client A 2022, and it wouldn't be on the shelf. Then the next day, it would turn up in the same spot I had checked. This repeated a few times with different files. I remember one Wednesday afternoon, I needed an important folder for a phone call with a new client. I rummaged through the closet and couldn't find it. I felt a rush of annoyance. I pulled out every single folder, stacking them on the floor, flipping through them. I checked behind the boxes, under the folders, and even inside an old binder. Nothing. I had to tell the client I'd call back. Then, the next morning, I reached for a random folder and saw the missing one neatly placed on top of the pile. I stared at it, feeling a jolt of confusion. I hadn't touched that closet since I searched it. The folder was just there, like it had never gone anywhere. I started feeling a little on edge. I wasn't outright scared, but I was uneasy. I knew I wasn't that disorganized. I spent my life being meticulous with files, but I had no proof of anything unusual, just my own memory. So I decided to keep it to myself. One day, though, I saw the door open slowly right in front of me. I was at my desk, entering data into a spreadsheet, and I heard a subtle creak. At first, I thought it was the office door, or maybe a loose window. But then I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. I stopped typing and turned my head. The closet door was moving, just a couple of inches, but definitely moving. It gave a soft, drawn-out squeak. I felt a tightness in my chest, and I held my breath for a second. I stared at that door. It was open a few inches, enough for me to see the darkness inside. I didn't see anything behind it. No person, no draft, nothing. My heart pounded in my ears. I got up slowly and walked over. I gripped the handle and pushed it shut. I felt an odd chill along my arms. The door didn't feel loose. It had some resistance. There wasn't a gap or anything that would make it swing on its own. I tried to replicate the movement. I opened it halfway, let go, and it stayed in place. I opened it just a crack, let go, and it stayed shut. I couldn't reproduce that slow swing that I had just witnessed. After that, I felt uneasy anytime I was alone in the office. Every small noise made me flinch. Sometimes I heard faint tapping sounds, like something shifting inside the closet. I started imagining that maybe there was some old ventilation shaft or a loose board behind the closet. But I never found any real sign of that. The building was old, so I expected it to have creaks and groans, but this felt too deliberate. I decided to set up my phone and record. I placed it on my desk and angled the camera at the closet. I let it roll while I worked. I didn't see anything during the first session, which lasted about an hour. I watched the footage and only heard the faint hum of my computer's fan. No movement, no door opening. Over the next few days, I tried again. I left my phone running while I stepped out for coffee. I came back to find the closet door slightly open, but when I checked the recording, it showed nothing. It was crazy. The door was in the frame the entire time, and there was absolutely no sign of it moving. The only sounds on the recording were passing footsteps in the hallway outside and the low hum of traffic on the street. Yet in person, the door was definitely not in the same position as before. I started to doubt my own perception. Maybe I was forgetting to close it. Maybe I was looking at it from an angle and confusing myself. But the missing folders made that explanation hard to swallow. I tried to approach it rationally. I tested the lock, the hinges, the entire structure. Everything seemed solid, albeit old. There was a bit of rust on the hinges, and the lock was a classic style with a big key. I asked the building manager if he had a spare key or something. He told me he only had the key for the main door and no access to my closet. I believed him because he seemed genuine, and there was no reason for him to lie. One evening, I stayed late to finish up some quarterly reports. It was around 8 p.m. The office was quiet and the hallway lights were dim. I could hear the elevator at the end of the corridor, but nobody seemed to be on this floor. I stood up to stretch and noticed the closet door again. It looked shut, but I felt an urge to check inside. I walked over, turned the knob, and pulled the door open. The interior smelled like dusty wood. My boxes of documents and a few binders were stacked on the bottom shelf. I stepped closer and felt the weight of the still air. I touched the back panel. It was solid, maybe a little damp. I didn't see any cracks or holes. I knocked lightly on the back. It made a dull thud. There was no hollow sound. There was nothing behind it. I left my phone recording on a chair facing the closet while I stood there with the door open. I called out, "Is anyone here?" I felt silly, but I wanted to see if something would happen. Nothing did. There was no shift, no sound, just my own breathing. My throat felt dry and I realized I was tense. I closed the door slowly and watched it. It stayed shut. I locked it and jiggled the handle. It held firm. I walked back to the phone and stopped recording. Once again, I got nothing. Just the sound of my own voice echoing slightly in the empty room. About a week later, the incidents continued. Folders disappeared and reappeared. The door was sometimes open when I walked in, or it was locked when I knew I hadn't locked it. I started checking local hardware stores for small security cameras. I figured a dedicated camera might be more reliable than my phone. I bought a cheap motion-activated camera and set it up on a small tripod near my desk. I aimed it right at the closet, making sure the entire door was in frame. Then I went about my business. I told myself I would review the footage at the end of the day. The first day I tried the camera, nothing triggered it. I found the door locked in the morning and locked when I left. The second day, the closet door was slightly open when I arrived. I reviewed the footage, and it showed no movement. The motion sensor never turned on. It was like the door never budged. I felt frustrated, but I also felt an increased sense of dread. Something was happening that I couldn't see. There was no alarm, no forced entry, just this weird cycle of open, closed, and missing documents. I started thinking about the people who might have rented this office before me. I asked the property manager if he knew. He said a few accountants and maybe a small law firm had used it in the past. He said he didn't keep detailed records, just old paperwork for the building. Nobody had complained about anything unusual to his knowledge. I asked some neighbors on the same floor, but they just shrugged or joked that the building was ancient. They said it had quirks. One guy mentioned hearing strange noises from the pipes, but nothing about doors opening on their own. I tried to focus on my work and ignore the closet. I pushed the desk a little closer to the window so I wouldn't have to look at it all day. Sometimes I heard a faint squeak, and my stomach would tighten, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself it was just an old building settling. Still, when I opened the door and found a file missing, I felt my patience slip. I'd curse under my breath. My pulse would quicken. Then, hours later, the file would be back. One night, I decided to confront it directly. I stayed after hours again, locked the main door, and placed the camera on a tripod facing the closet. I sat in my chair with a clear view of the door. I turned on a bright lamp so everything was illuminated. I opened the closet door wide and said out loud that I wanted answers. I sounded ridiculous, but I was fed up. The closet stood open, revealing stacks of files and an empty space for my office supplies. The air felt still. I sat there for half an hour, not moving much, just watching. I felt sweat form on my forehead. My eyes started to water from staring, but the door never moved. Finally, I stood up and walked to the door. I looked inside. I ran my hands along the interior edges. I tapped the back panel a few times. Then I felt a sudden chill on the left side, near the hinges. It was like cold air hitting my fingers. I jerked my hand back. My heart raced. I held my hand there again, and I didn't feel the cold anymore. It was gone. I shut the door, locked it, and walked back to my desk. I was shaky. I had no idea how to explain any of this. I stopped the recording. Later, I checked the footage, and all it showed was me exploring the closet and then returning to my desk. No movement. No door opening on its own. Nothing. At this point, I live with it. The door still opens or locks by itself sometimes. Folders still vanish and return after a day or two. I keep my most important files on my computer now, and I only store less critical items in that closet. I sometimes hear faint knocks or clicks, but I do my best to tune them out. I tell myself I'm just tired, or the building is old, or my memory is playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know it's more than that. I haven't told many people. A few friends just tell me to move out or get the closet replaced. But it's an expensive project, and I'm not sure it would change anything. Part of me wants to investigate more, but another part of me wants to ignore it. I can't prove anything's off, and I have no evidence of a break-in or any crime, so I stay here and work. Each day, I step into the office, check the closet door, and see if it's open or locked. Sometimes I find everything as I left it. Other times, a folder will be in the wrong spot or the door will be open a crack. Every time it happens, I feel my heart thump, and I get a small rush of adrenaline. Then I push it aside, do my job, and move on. I wonder who used this room before me and whether they experienced the same things. I wonder if they ever tried to record it or if they just accepted it. I wish I had more details, but the property manager doesn't have records from decades ago. It's just an old building with an old closet. For now, I keep my phone in my pocket ready to record when I hear a noise. But the moment I press record, everything goes quiet. The door sits still, and nothing moves. When I stop recording, the door might click open again. I have no explanation. I just go to work each day feeling my muscles tense up when I pass that closet. No one else sees it happen. No one else experiences the disappearances. I'm stuck with this strange reality. Maybe it's something left over from the past. Maybe it's my imagination fueled by stress. I don't have proof. I only know what I see. Every time I hear that quiet creak, my stomach clenches. Sometimes I hurry to the door and slam it shut. Other times I let it stay open and pretend it doesn't bother me. Either way, I'm never totally relaxed, and that's how I live now. I keep moving forward, doing my accounting work, and dealing with the phone calls and emails. But in the back of my mind, I'm always waiting for the next time the lock clicks without warning or a file vanishes and reappears. That's the daily reality of my small old office, and that's the story I have. It's not dramatic. It's just me in a closet that won't stay put, and it's enough to keep me on edge every single day. I'm not the kind of guy who scares easily, but these last few weeks have tested my nerves in ways I've never experienced. I've been working as a night security guard in a small residential complex for a few years. Most of my nights are uneventful. I do my rounds, check the parking lot, monitor the cameras, and make sure everything is locked up. Sometimes I see stray cats searching for food near the trash bins, or I spot a raccoon. But for a while now, there's been something else out there, and it's not a raccoon. I usually arrive around 10 p.m. I park my old sedan in the visitors section, walk straight to the guard station near the front gate, and greet whoever's ending the previous shift. We exchange a few words about any new memos from the condo management or updates about broken lights in the hallways. Then I take over. My job involves keeping an eye on the security monitors inside the station, but I also do rounds in person, walking around the perimeter and through the parking lot. The place has around 25 apartments split across a few buildings. The parking lot sits in the middle. There's a gate that only residents can open with their remotes, and there's a big perimeter wall covered with those little broken glass shards at the top. It's not the fanciest place, but it's safe enough for most people. Everything was normal until about 3 weeks ago. I started noticing this figure standing in one of the darker corners of the parking area. We have a section of the lot that's dimmer because the overhead light there is weak. It's right beside the concrete wall, where a couple of cars park and almost never move. There's a big patch of cracked asphalt, and at night, there's just a small puddle that never fully dries. That corner stays damp and it smells a bit like mold. One night, while doing my usual patrol, I saw a figure wearing a hooded sweatshirt. It stood facing the line of cars. I stopped in my tracks and stared. The figure didn't move. I felt my pulse increase. I remember focusing on the shape of the hood and the slight outline of the shoulders under the moonlight. I tried to call out, "Hey, who's there?" But I got no response. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight. The light beam shook in my hand, but I don't know if it was from nerves or just me breathing heavily. As soon as I got close enough to see that corner clearly, there was no one. I turned the flashlight in every direction, checked behind the parked cars, looked around for footprints, anything. The spot was empty. There was a chilly breeze brushing across my arms. That was the first time I experienced something that odd in this job. I went straight to the station and reviewed the footage. The cameras in this place aren't top of the line. They're old with grainy resolution. But I saw a black shape there for a few seconds, motionless, right where I'd seen it in person. Then it was gone. The odd part is that it didn't move away like a person. It just disappeared from the frame. The next night, I kept an eye on the monitors more often. Every hour or so, I did a walk around. 2 nights passed. Nothing happened. Then on the 4th night after that incident, I was doing my 2 a.m. round. It was quiet, just the usual background hum of electricity and the faint sound of a TV from one of the top apartments. I heard a small rustling sound near the wall. I whipped around and aimed my flashlight. The hooded figure stood in that same spot. It was so dark in that area that I couldn't make out facial details, not even the shape of the chin or the nose. Just that hoodie and the stance. My breath caught in my throat. I managed to say, "Hey, do you live here?" My voice sounded shaky. I got no reply again. This time, I stepped closer right away. I took maybe 5 strong steps toward the corner. My shoes made a scraping noise on the asphalt. The figure remained there. I took one more step and it was gone. I didn't even see it move. It was like turning off a light switch. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. I jerked my flashlight around, shining it under the nearby vehicles. My heart was thumping hard. I took my radio out and considered calling the local police, but then I thought about how strange it would sound. I saw a hooded figure vanish. That wouldn't go over well. I decided not to call them. I finished my patrol, but the rest of the shift I kept glancing at the monitors. A few nights later, I asked a few residents if they'd seen anything unusual. Most said no. One older guy in Building B told me he thought he saw a hooded man near his car around midnight. He assumed it was a thief, but he didn't want to confront him alone. He never reported it to us. He just waited until morning to check if his car was okay. It was fine. Nothing was stolen. No signs of a break-in. But he was sure he saw that man in a hoodie roaming around. That gave me chills. I started to wonder if we had a burglar or someone scoping out the vehicles, but it still felt off. Thieves usually move around. They don't just stand in one spot for so long, and how would he keep vanishing like that? The nights after that, I became more stressed. My body felt tense before I even started my shift. Around midnight, my gut would tighten. My jaws felt stiff because I was clenching my teeth without even noticing. When I walked through the parking lot, every little noise made me jump. Even the flicker of a street lamp across the road felt suspicious. I tried to stay calm by reminding myself I had a flashlight, a radio, and the option to call the cops if needed. But the tension made my rounds feel longer and heavier. About a week into this strange routine, I saw the figure again on the camera feed at around 1:30 a.m. I was in the guard station looking at the monitors. I'd left them on a split-screen view so I could watch multiple angles of the parking lot at once. That corner camera flickered a bit. Sometimes it does that because of a loose wire. In that flicker, I noticed a dark shape. I leaned forward in my chair, watching carefully. It was there, standing still. I gripped the desk and felt a bead of sweat forming on my temple. I zoomed in a bit, but the image got too grainy to see any details. Just a silhouette. I watched for a full minute or two. The shape didn't move. Then I saw the camera glitch, and when it cleared, the shape was gone. Right then, I grabbed my flashlight and headed out the door. My heart was pounding. I walked quickly to that corner, shining the light around. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the nearby walls. The air felt slightly cold. I sniffed the air, but only smelled the usual damp pavement and a faint hint of car exhaust. I checked between each parked vehicle, under them, behind them. There was no one. That entire corner was empty, except for the usual puddle. I crouched down and looked at the puddle's surface. It only showed my reflection in the dim glow from the overhead light. No footprints or anything unusual. I stood there for another minute, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Every day that passed, I felt more uneasy. I started sleeping poorly during the daytime. I'd close my curtains and lie in bed, but my mind would run in circles. I pictured that hooded shape lurking around and wondered if it was actually human or something else. I got up, splashed water on my face, drank some coffee, tried to calm down. But by the time my next shift started, I was on edge again. It turned into a cycle of tense nights and fitful days. I brought it up with the condo manager. He's a short guy, balding, always wearing a collared shirt tucked into his slacks. I told him we might have a trespasser. I mentioned the camera footage and my personal encounters. He seemed concerned at first, but when I showed him the recordings, he just shook his head and said, "That could be a glitch, or maybe some kid messing around. Keep an eye out, but let me know if it escalates." I asked for better lights in that corner. He promised to see what he could do, but he didn't sound eager. A new lamp costs money after all. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a person wearing dark clothes who knew how to slip out of sight. If so, how did they come in without tripping the gate sensor? Could they climb over the walls? It's possible, but I'd expect to hear some noise or see a sign of them climbing. I thought about the idea of the figure being a resident who liked to walk around at night. But why hide? Why vanish so fast? And the old man's story about the hooded man near his vehicle matched my sightings. We couldn't both be imagining the same figure. One night I decided to stay near that corner in the shadows instead of walking around. I figured I'd wait for a while and see if the figure showed up. I stood behind a parked SUV around midnight keeping watch. The night was quiet. I could hear a distant siren from some street miles away. The overhead lights buzzed softly. My legs started to ache after a while. I leaned against the SUV to keep my balance steady. Nothing happened for what felt like an hour. Then I saw a slight movement near the wall. It was just a flicker of motion in the corner of my eye, but I focused on it immediately. I saw the hooded figure standing about 15 feet away, facing the lot again. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would blow my eardrums. I tried to approach slowly, but the figure must have sensed me. I took maybe 2 steps and it was gone. I sprinted the rest of the way. Nothing. The spot was empty again. I thought I heard a quiet scuff on the ground behind me, but when I spun around, there was only my shadow stretched across the pavement. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. That same night, around 3 a.m., I was inside the guard station. I heard what sounded like footsteps on the gravel path that runs beside the building. I snatched my flashlight and opened the door. The footsteps stopped. I stepped outside, looked around, saw no one. My breath was shaky. I walked around that side of the building, shining the light across the shrubs. I saw nothing out of place. No movement. No rustling of leaves. Just the faint flicker of the parking lot light. By then, I felt sweat on my forehead. My uniform shirt stuck to my back. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I was exhausted and jumpy. The next day, I tried to talk with some of the other guards who worked during the day. They hadn't seen anything strange, but they also said they mostly stay at the guard station letting residents in and out. They rarely walk around the lot in daylight because it's not really necessary. One of them joked, "Maybe you need to get more sleep." I tried to laugh it off, but the tension in my shoulders never left. A few nights later, around 2:45 a.m., I caught another glimpse on the camera feed. Same corner, same hooded silhouette. This time the shape seemed a little taller than usual, but it might have been the angle. I grabbed my flashlight, rushed out of the station, and power walked to the spot. My legs felt shaky. When I turned the corner, I saw the hooded figure from behind. It was the first time I'd seen its back. The hoodie was dark gray or black. It looked worn, maybe old. I saw the figure's shoulders rise and fall like it was breathing. I shouted, "Stop!" It turned its head slightly, but I still couldn't see a face. Then it bolted. I swear I heard the scuff of shoes on the asphalt. I chased after it for a few steps, but it rounded the corner of a parked car. When I reached that car, there was no one behind it. There wasn't even time for a real person to hide. I stared at the empty space, panting, hands on my knees. The wind was still. No doors opened. No gates opened. Nothing. I kept the flashlight pointed out, scanning the area. I felt my stomach twist. My arms tingled with pins and needles. I looked up at the building windows. Most were dark. I saw 1 or 2 lights on, but no silhouettes of anyone watching. The place felt deserted except for me. I pulled out my phone and thought about calling the manager, but it was nearly 3 a.m. And what would I say that I hadn't already told him? I just went back to the station, sat in my chair, and tried to calm down. As the nights wore on, I sensed the figure more frequently, even if I didn't always see it. Sometimes I'd feel a strange pressure in the air. My neck would prickle, like someone was watching me. I started checking the cameras every few minutes. I walked the lot more often, too. My shifts felt twice as long. I became edgy around little noises, the creaking of a nearby gate, or the pop of the overhead bulbs. The security job I once found peaceful turned into a source of constant anxiety. One night, the old man in Building B came by the guard station around 11 p.m. He said he'd seen the hooded man again by his car about an hour ago. He asked me if anyone else had complained. I told him no one else reported it, but I'd seen the figure on camera. I admitted I couldn't figure out who or what it was. He just nodded and said, "I don't like this. I feel uneasy." I understood. I felt uneasy too. He went back to his apartment and I sat there thinking about how this wouldn't go away on its own. I wanted to get a better look at that face, but every time I got close, the figure vanished. By now, it's been almost a month since the first sighting. The figure still appears in that dark corner, though not every night. Sometimes I'll go a few days without seeing it. Then it shows up again, standing motionless, staring in the direction of the parked cars, or walking between them. When it appears, it doesn't run around messing with anything. It doesn't break windows or slash tires. It just stands or moves quietly. But it's enough to make me dread my rounds. I keep hoping for a moment when I can catch it clearly on camera or confront it in person. But my attempts all fail. I've tried different tactics, walking the perimeter in the opposite direction, checking that corner first, using the camera's zoom function to watch for longer. Nothing helps. The figure shows up when it wants and it leaves no trace. No footprints, no items left behind. It just leaves me with that pounding in my chest and a sense of uncertainty that follows me even after my shift ends. I've reached a point where I'm expecting something to happen next. Maybe it's a trickster or a person with some weird intention. Maybe it's something beyond my understanding. But I know that every time I step into that parking lot at night, my eyes go straight to that corner. My hand grips the flashlight a little tighter. My breath gets shallow. My ears strain for any sound of shuffling feet. It feels like a standoff, except I don't even know who or what I'm facing. It's a presence that refuses to be pinned down. I don't involve the police because I have no solid evidence of a crime. The manager isn't too eager to bring them in either. The best I can do is keep watch. The older resident from Building B is nervous, but no one else has come forward with more than passing remarks. Some people laugh it off, calling it a phantom thief. But I'm not laughing. Each night, I wonder if I'll finally see the figure up close, see its face, or get some explanation. The tension sits in my stomach like a heavy stone, and every shift feels like I'm walking on a thin line between calm and panic. It's almost morning now. I'm finishing another shift, and I saw that hooded shape about an hour ago on the monitor. Same corner, same vanishing act. My nerves are shot. My hands are still shaking a bit. I've got about 15 more minutes before the day guard arrives. When I get home, I'll try to sleep, but I'll probably lie in bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow night, I'll come back here again, and I'll patrol the lot. I'll check the cameras. I'll keep my flashlight ready. And I'll wait for that hooded figure to appear again, half hoping this time I'll find some kind of answer. So far, all I have are questions, and each new sighting just adds to the pile. I moved into my small rural property about 3 weeks ago. The house sits on flat land with a patch of trees behind it and a modest orchard to one side. The only things I saw as potential problems were the old wiring and the low-ceilinged basement. I'm not a nervous person and I'm used to quiet surroundings, but something here made me uneasy from day one. I'm going to explain exactly what happened, step by step, without any dramatic flourishes or fancy language. I just want to share the facts as I experience them. The day I got the keys, I parked my pickup near the front porch and hauled in a few boxes. The place was mostly furnished because the previous owner left a lot of his old stuff behind. He told me he was downsizing and didn't want to bother with the furniture. I walked from room to room, checking light switches and windows. The house felt ordinary, maybe a bit dusty. At that point, nothing seemed strange. When I opened the door to the basement, though, I noticed it smelled damp and stale, like old earth. The steps were wood, and they creaked under my weight. I'm about 6 feet tall, so the overhead clearance was low. I had to duck to avoid hitting my head on the floor joists above. It felt cramped, and the single light bulb in the center cast weak light. I stood in one spot, glanced around, and noticed some wooden racks. The previous owner said he used them for storing homemade wine. I saw a few empty bottles scattered around. I didn't stay long because it felt stuffy and I wanted fresh air. Over the next few days, I settled in. I hung clothes in the closets, filled the kitchen cabinets, and set up my tools in a corner of the house. I started a routine of going into town in the morning to grab groceries or hardware supplies. In the afternoons, I'd return and work on small repairs. By the end of the first week, I had replaced a few broken shingles on the roof and cleaned out the gutters. Everything was normal until the second weekend. I wanted to organize that basement. The racks were cluttered with old cans, bottles, and some rusted tools. I walked down there around noon, turned on the dim light, and began sorting items. That was the first time I felt something off. I was kneeling, putting empty bottles into a crate. I heard what sounded like a slow exhale behind me. It was faint, but it was definitely a breath. My own breathing was steady because I was just moving at a regular pace, not exerting myself. This was different. It sounded like another person's slow sigh. I paused and turned my head. There was no one there, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. My stomach tightened. I told myself it might be the old wood shifting or the wind coming through a crack in the foundation. I got back to work, but I kept checking behind me every few minutes. I didn't hear it again that day. I slept fine that night, but I woke up a bit earlier than usual the next morning. The house was quiet. I walked around with my coffee cup, checking the rooms. Nothing seemed out of place. I told myself that weird sensations are normal in a new house, especially one that's old and a bit run down. I even tried to laugh it off. Still, I decided I wouldn't linger in that basement unless I really needed to. A few days later, I noticed something else. I had gone back downstairs because I wanted to see if there was any sign of a leak in the foundation walls. The basement can get damp, and I was worried about water issues. While shining a flashlight on the concrete, I saw 3 vertical scratches in the whitewash. They were spaced like claw marks, about shoulder height. Each scratch looked like something sharp had been dragged across the surface. They didn't look like random scuffs. They were too defined. I rubbed my fingertip over them and felt the groove. That gave me chills. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe the previous owner did it while moving something heavy. Maybe he accidentally scraped the wall with a tool. But they looked like repeated scratches. I checked around and didn't see any other obvious damage. I left the basement and tried to push it out of my mind, but it stuck with me. That night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. My bedroom is on the far side of the house, away from the living room. The floors are hardwood. When they creak, it's usually because of temperature changes, but what I heard wasn't a creak. It was a steady, rhythmic thud, like footsteps. It sounded like they were coming from beneath me. The basement spans almost the entire footprint of the house, so if someone walked down there, maybe the sound could travel up into the bedroom floor. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. I tried to figure out if it was some kind of animal, but it sounded heavier than a raccoon or possum. I listened for almost half a minute. The footsteps were slow, then they stopped. My heart beat harder. My hands felt sweaty. I slipped out of bed, put on a pair of pants, and grabbed a flashlight. The house was dark. I walked down the hall and flipped the light switch for the kitchen. Nothing looked disturbed. I moved to the basement door. It was closed, but I always keep it locked with a padlock. Now the padlock was dangling, open, on the latch. I froze. I clearly remembered locking it the night before because I never leave that basement unsecured. I pulled the padlock off the latch and examined it. No scratches, no sign of forced entry. It was just unlocked. I flicked on my flashlight and opened the basement door. The single light bulb below was off. Everything was dark. I stood at the top of the steps, shining the flashlight around. The basement looked still. My hands were trembling a bit. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded shaky. No response. I flicked the light switch on. The bulb lit up the center of the basement. Nothing seemed moved or out of place. I took a few steps down and scanned the corners. There was no one there. I felt stupid standing there in my t-shirt, holding a flashlight, so I went back up, locked the padlock, and double-checked it. I felt no urge to investigate further. I just wanted to go back to bed, but I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up and listening. I heard nothing else, but I was tense until morning. The next day, I went into town to buy a new padlock. The hardware store owner recommended a heavy-duty brand. He said it was strong enough to withstand bolt cutters. I didn't explain why I wanted it, I just bought it, along with a new hasp for extra security. I installed it that afternoon. I tested it by pulling the basement door. It stayed shut. No wiggle. I felt a bit better after that. I decided to ignore everything else and focus on my normal routine. Things settled for about 2 days. Then, one evening, I finished dinner and sat down in the living room to watch something on TV. Around 9 o'clock, I heard a bump from somewhere near the kitchen. It sounded like a single knock on a hollow surface. I paused the show, walked into the kitchen, and realized the sound was coming from the direction of the basement door. I saw the new padlock. It was still secured. I stood there listening. My pulse was steady, but I felt a wave of apprehension. There was a dull thump, then silence. I put my ear to the door, but I couldn't hear anything else. I told myself it could be the pipes or the wood settling. After half a minute, I went back to the living room. I turned the TV volume up a little and tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. A few hours later, I headed to bed. I checked the door one more time. The lock was still secure. I locked my bedroom door too, which I normally never do, but I felt better having an extra barrier. I fell asleep, but around 2 in the morning, I startled awake. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I waited, listening for any footsteps. Nothing. After about 10 minutes, I dozed off again. In the morning, I woke up to sunshine and birds outside. Everything seemed normal. I made coffee, checked my phone, and felt a sense of relief. The daylight usually did that for me. I walked over to the basement door. The padlock was still closed. I decided to check the basement, though, just to be sure. I grabbed the key, unlocked the padlock, and pushed the door open. My footstep on the top stair echoed in the basement. When I reached the bottom, I stood still and scanned the area. The racks looked the same. The old bottles were still on the floor in one corner. Then I noticed something new on the wall opposite the scratch marks. There was a faint smear. It looked like a handprint, but smudged, as if someone with dirty fingers had pressed against the whitewashed wall. I went closer and carefully placed my hand over it. It was about the same size as my palm, maybe a bit narrower. The print was grayish, like dust or ash. I touched the wall, but it was dry. No moisture. My stomach turned. I realized I hadn't been on that side of the basement for at least a week. I searched the whole area, looking behind boxes, opening the old cabinets in the corner. I didn't see any footprints or signs of someone living down there. It still smelled damp, and the dirt floor near the foundation was undisturbed. I wondered if I had just missed this handprint earlier, or if it was new. I decided to wash it off. I didn't want to keep looking at it. I grabbed a rag from upstairs, wetted it, and scrubbed the mark until it faded. I checked the scratch marks on the other wall. They were the same as before. I left the basement, locked it again, and sat down in my kitchen with a second cup of coffee. I felt unsettled. My hands were shaking a bit. I started thinking about calling someone for help, maybe a neighbor or a friend, but I didn't have many contacts out here yet. I also didn't want to be that guy who freaks out over nothing. Days passed with fewer incidents. I tried to keep busy. I mowed the grass, trimmed some branches, and even painted one of the rooms upstairs. But every so often, especially at night, I caught myself listening. I'd turn off the TV or close my laptop and just sit, expecting to hear something. Sometimes there was nothing, and sometimes there was a faint creak or thud that I couldn't place. Then, a little over a week ago, I decided I should clean the basement thoroughly. I didn't want lingering junk or possible rodent nests. I pulled out my shop vacuum, some heavy-duty trash bags, and a work light. That morning, I went down around 10. I vacuumed cobwebs from the corners and swept up piles of dirt that had accumulated over the years. I filled 2 trash bags with broken glass, old rags, and pieces of wood. While I worked, I felt a constant urge to turn around. It was like someone was standing a foot behind me, breathing down my neck. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was no one there. My shoulders felt stiff, and my scalp tingled. My heartbeat was steady but elevated, the way it gets when you sense someone is watching you. At one point, I stopped vacuuming and just listened. I could hear my own breath. I whispered, "Is someone here?" Nothing. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself there's no logical reason for a person to be hidden in such a cramped space. There's nowhere to hide. I finished cleaning, took the trash bags up, and closed the door. I locked it as usual. I went about the rest of my day, but I felt uneasy. That night I fell asleep around 11. I woke around 4 in the morning to a sound I recognized as footsteps again. This time, it was louder and more distinct, like slow, deliberate steps. Then I heard a soft thud, as if the basement door was lightly bumped. My heart started pounding. I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. I listened. The next noise was the squeak of hinges. It sounded like the basement door opening. I got out of bed as quietly as I could. My heart was hammering. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. My mouth felt dry, and my palms were damp. I walked to my bedroom door, opened it a crack, and peeked into the hallway. It was dark except for the faint glow of the kitchen nightlight. I stood there for about a minute, expecting to see someone step around the corner. Nothing happened. I moved slowly down the hall. I reached the kitchen. The basement door was slightly ajar. The new padlock lay on the floor, open, with no visible damage. That's when my chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I crept forward and nudged the door. The basement was dark. I flicked on the light switch near the door, and the bulb down there lit up. It looked empty. I didn't hear movement anymore. I decided not to go down. I closed the door, slid the padlock back in place, and locked it. I just stood there for a moment, breathing hard. In the morning, I replaced the padlock again with yet another new one just in case. That's the situation now. I still hear sounds occasionally. I still feel watched whenever I step into that basement. There are no answers. There's no damage to the door. There's no forced entry. The locks just end up on the floor, open, with no hint of tampering. I don't have a better explanation. Something down there doesn't want to stay locked away. I can't prove it, but I feel it. I'm trying to keep living here, taking care of the property, but I can't pretend this isn't happening. It's real to me. I've seen the scratches, the handprint, the padlocks undone on the floor. I've heard the footsteps in the middle of the night. No children are involved and nobody's died here that I know of, but it's still unsettling. I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone in this house. That's the truth of it. I lock that basement door every night, but I keep expecting to see it wide open by morning. I keep expecting to hear those steps circling below, like someone pacing back and forth, waiting for me to come down. And I can't say I'm ready to face whatever it is again. I've been driving trucks for over 10 years, and there's one place that still makes me tense. It's a lonely intersection in the countryside of São Paulo, right in the middle of sugarcane fields. My radio always cuts out there. My phone goes out of range. Even the insects stop making noise. It's like the entire area holds its breath, and it shakes me up every single time. I first started hauling cargo through this route about 5 years ago. It's a long stretch, mostly 2-lane roads, lots of sugarcane on both sides. Sometimes there are gaps in the cane where you can see a small house or a dirt road, but most of it is just tall green stalks. The intersection I'm talking about isn't marked on the GPS as anything special. It's just a turnoff toward a few remote farms. But I remember the first time I passed it. It was around noon, and I noticed the radio static. That alone didn't bother me. Plenty of back roads in Brazil knocked the signal out. Then my phone signal died. Again, not a huge surprise. But the weird thing was the silence around me. Usually I hear insects buzzing or birds rustling around in the cane. That day, it felt like I'd gone deaf. My ears felt plugged. I turned off my engine for a moment to see if I could hear anything outside. Nothing. Then, after I drove on, the usual sounds came back. At first, I chalked it up to normal reception issues. I drove that route a few more times, noticed the same pattern, and never saw anything out of the ordinary until about a year after I started that job. That night, I had a delivery up north and needed to pass by that intersection. It was close to 2 in the morning when I got there. I remember it clearly because I was a bit tired, and I was thinking about whether I should stop for coffee at the next rest stop. The road was pitch black except for my headlights. The cane fields on both sides were still, not even a rustle from the wind. My radio was just static, so I turned it off. My phone was on the seat next to me, showing no service. Everything felt heavy. Then I saw something up ahead on the right shoulder. It looked like a person wearing white. I assumed it might be someone needing help, maybe a hitchhiker. I slowed down. My high beams lit up that spot, and I noticed what seemed like a long dress. I couldn't see a face. In the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. It didn't jump or run. It just vanished. I braked hard. The truck shuddered and my heart thumped in my chest. I kept staring where the person had been. My eyes were tired, but I knew I saw something. I pulled over, left the engine running, and grabbed a flashlight. I walked around the side of the road. My legs felt shaky. I shined the light into the cane, expecting maybe someone had fainted or fallen. The cane leaves rustled when I pushed them aside, but I didn't see any movement deeper in. No footprints, no torn fabric, no sign of anybody. After a few minutes, I decided to get back in the truck. My hands were sweating. I sat there for a moment, trying to slow my breathing before I started driving again. That night, I couldn't get the image out of my head. I mentioned it to a friend of mine who also drives trucks in the region. He shrugged and said the roads are weird at night and sometimes the eyes play tricks. He said he'd driven that route plenty of times and never saw a thing. That made me question my own experience. Maybe I was just seeing a reflection in the cane, or maybe I was too tired. But then a few months later, I passed by that intersection again around midnight. I was more alert this time. The same silence hit me like a wall. Even my AC vent felt too loud in that moment. I kept my eyes peeled for anything on the shoulder. Right when I came up to that turn, I thought I saw movement to my left. It was so quick that I almost doubted it, but it looked like white cloth fluttering at the edge of my headlights. I clenched the wheel. I got that same jolt in my chest. The figure didn't show up in full, so I kept driving, but I felt a prickling along my neck. My skin was clammy, and my pulse pounded in my ears. I didn't stop this time. I was too scared to find out if someone was actually standing there. I didn't like it, but I convinced myself I had a schedule to keep. After that, I tried to avoid that road at night. For a while, I changed my schedule so I'd pass the intersection during the day. I told a few buddies about my experience, but nobody else reported seeing a person in white. They did mention the signal drops and the silence, but they said it was just normal for that stretch. Maybe it is, but the figure I saw didn't feel normal at all. I want to be clear. I'm not someone who buys into stories about ghosts or whatever. My job is straightforward. Pick up cargo, drive to the destination, deliver, and repeat. I handle breakdowns, weird roads, and occasionally suspicious folks near rest stops. That's part of the job, but that intersection rattled me in a way I can't ignore. There was one night, about 6 months ago, that really got under my skin. I was hauling a load of produce and I got delayed. I knew I'd hit that intersection around 3 in the morning. It was raining lightly, not enough to wash out the road, but enough to make visibility a challenge. My wipers were going, and every few seconds, the passing headlights of an oncoming car would blind me a bit. The radio was just hissing, so I turned it off. My phone showed no bars once again. When I got near the intersection, I had this heavy feeling in my chest. My eyes darted from side to side. The cane looked taller than usual. Everything felt closed in. The rain tapped on the windshield, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they hurt. As I approached, I saw a pale shape on the side of the road again. It was just barely visible between the raindrops and the darkness. I started to slow down. My heart hammered. My mouth went dry. At that moment, I heard a low, quiet moan. It cut through the engine noise. I swear it sounded like someone in pain or someone calling out, but I couldn't make out any words. I braked, trying to see if there was an injured person. I opened my window a crack. The sound was gone. Rain dripped onto my arm, and I shivered. I pulled over, hazard lights on, and grabbed my flashlight. The cane swayed in the drizzle. I heard water hitting leaves. I stepped off the shoulder, scanning the ground. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. Then I heard a soft rustling behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight. My beam landed on rows of cane plants. They moved with the wind, but I felt a knot in my stomach. My arms tingled. I didn't see any figure, but I felt watched. I rushed back to my cab and locked the door. I sat there for a minute, my heart beating fast. The interior of the truck smelled like damp cloth and sweat. My shirt stuck to my back. I forced myself to keep going. The rest of the drive that night felt like an eternity. For a week after that, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about that moan. It wasn't loud, but it sounded like a person, or maybe an animal. But I've heard injured animals before, and this didn't sound like any animal I know. I told another driver about it. He suggested it might be a local worker. Maybe someone was trying to get attention. But I looked, and nobody was there. Plus, why would they vanish into thin air? Over the next few months, I spoke to locals at some of the roadside diners. A couple of them nodded like they'd heard similar stories. One guy said that Stretch has weird energy and that he never walks there at night. Another person said the radio and phone signals always go dead, so he avoids lingering. Nobody gave me a concrete explanation. Some of them teased me, saying I was spooked by shadows. Others just shrugged. I tried to find out if there was an accident or something, but no one gave me details. I didn't push too hard. The last thing I wanted was to turn my trips into a ghost hunt. I just wanted to do my job without losing my mind. Still, every time I passed that place, I braced myself. About 2 months ago, I drove through that intersection around 1 in the morning. It was another clear night. The sky was full of stars, and the moon was out. Sometimes that moonlight helps me see farther, so I was hoping it would make me less jumpy. But as soon as I got close, the radio died again. Total static. I turned it off, felt that familiar pressure in my chest, and slowed down a bit. This time, I saw movement straight ahead. It was in the middle of the intersection, not on the shoulder. I thought it might be a stray animal, so I prepared to brake. The figure was wearing white. It looked like a dress, but I couldn't see a face or arms. It was just a shape. I felt like my blood turned cold. I actually said out loud, "What the hell?" Then, in an instant, it wasn't there. I blinked, looked around, and there was nothing. The intersection was empty. The cane fields were motionless. I could hear the rumble of my engine and feel my own pulse in my neck. I kept going. My heart wouldn't slow down, and I noticed my shirt was soaked at the armpits. My hands shook. I turned the air conditioning on high, hoping the cold air would steady me. I kept checking my mirrors to see if something was behind me. Every shadow on the road made me flinch. A few minutes later, my phone signal came back, and the radio started picking up a faint channel again. It was like crossing an invisible border. I don't know what to call this thing. I'm not saying it's a ghost. I'm not saying it's a trick of the light. All I know is that intersection makes me uneasy. Something feels off, like the air is heavier there. Maybe something bad happened once. Maybe it's just a patch of land with weird magnetic interference. I really don't know, but I hate passing through it. I get that knot in my stomach every single time. My arms feel numb and I start gripping the wheel too hard. My jaw tightens. I look around, waiting to see that figure in white. 2 weeks back, I got a delivery schedule that put me at that intersection again after midnight. I tried to leave earlier, but there was traffic on the highway. By the time I got off the main road, it was already late. I stopped at a gas station about 20 miles before the intersection to calm down. I checked my truck, got some coffee, and chatted briefly with the attendant. He said the area past the next few hills was known for weird stories. He said he heard about a figure in white too, though he had never seen it himself. I felt a chill when he mentioned that. I didn't push for more details. Eventually, I got back on the road. The night was quiet. The stars were bright. The smell of sugarcane hung in the air, kind of sweet and earthy. The moment my GPS showed I was a few miles from the intersection, I turned off the radio before it had the chance to go staticky. My phone showed 1 bar, then 0, then 1 again. I slowed down, took a deep breath, and kept my eyes on the road. My palms were sweaty, and I kept wiping one hand on my pant leg while the other steadied the wheel. I passed the sign that indicates the turnoff was coming. The cane on both sides was thick, and I couldn't see past it. The road was empty. I think I saw maybe one other truck far in the distance behind me. As soon as I was within a quarter mile of the intersection, the silence kicked in. The hum of the engine sounded muffled. I cracked the window and listened. No insects, no wind, no nothing. I came to the intersection. My headlights swept over the area. The asphalt looked normal. The shoulder was clear. I almost thought maybe this time I'd pass without seeing anything. But then, in my peripheral vision, I saw a shape moving slowly. I turned my head, and there it was, just on the edge of the cane on my left. It looked like a dress again, long, white, and still. My hands started shaking. I hit the brakes. My seatbelt dug into my chest. The figure seemed to shift back into the cane. I strained my eyes, trying to catch any detail. I wanted to see a person's face, or at least confirm it was a person. There was no noise. The leaves weren't even rustling. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I could smell my own fear, that sharp, salty odor on my skin. I waited a few seconds, then decided I wasn't going to step out. I was too afraid to check again. I pressed the accelerator and moved on. My heart raced. My breathing was loud. After about a minute, the normal sounds of the night returned. I switched the radio on, and it crackled back to life. My phone buzzed with a notification. I had service again. I felt a flood of relief. My arms were tense, but I tried to shake them out and keep driving. I must have checked my mirrors every 10 seconds for the next few miles. I don't pass that intersection every day, but it's part of my job. I never know what I'm going to see. Sometimes it's just silence and nothing appears. Other times I catch a glimpse of white and it sets my nerves on edge for days. I wonder if there's some unfinished business in that spot, or if it's all in my head. I just know I can't deny what I've seen. Whenever I hit that stretch, I brace myself for the weird silence, the lack of radio signal, and maybe that figure standing on the side of the road. I'm still driving. I can't quit my job because of a strange intersection, but it weighs on me. Every time I see the headlights reflecting on that turn, my stomach tightens. I don't talk about it much anymore. I just keep my eyes forward and try to get through. And that's how it's been for years now. I do my haul, pass that spot, and hope I don't see anyone in white that night. If I do, I keep driving because I'm not getting out again. I have no explanation, but I know what I felt, and it still rattles me, even after all this time. I froze the first time I saw that shape in our guest room. The hallway light fell across the floorboards and stretched into the empty space, but there was something there. It was short, maybe waist-high, and I swear it turned its head in my direction. I couldn't see a face or any features. My pulse raced and I felt my fingers twitch. By the time I blinked, it was gone. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, staring at nothing but a made-up bed, a chest of drawers, and an old lamp on the nightstand. The air felt colder than anywhere else in the house. I remember swallowing hard, flicking on the ceiling light, and walking in with one foot still in the hallway as if I could retreat any second. Nothing. Just that thick, silent chill, and the sound of my breath echoing off the walls. My wife and I moved into this house a year ago. We have 3 bedrooms, but only 2 of them see much use. The guest room is tucked away at the end of the hallway, right next to the bathroom. It has a window facing the backyard, thick curtains, and a single bed that belonged to my wife's parents. Usually, we keep the door closed. We rarely have guests who stay overnight. Even my brother-in-law and sister-in-law prefer crashing on the couch when they visit. Nobody wants that room. I started noticing something odd within a month of moving in. Every time I walked past its door, I felt a slight shiver. At first, I blamed it on a draft or the AC vents. But we had the vents checked, and nothing was wrong. I also checked the insulation. Everything was in order. Still, the temperature in that room always felt off. After a few weeks, I began to realize it wasn't just me. My wife got uneasy too. She told me she'd sometimes hear faint rustling coming from inside when she was cleaning the hallway, like sheets shifting or the floor creaking. She'd open the door, step inside, and stand there waiting. Nothing else would happen. It was always quiet after that. She said it gave her goosebumps. I acted like it was no big deal. I didn't want her to stress over it. But deep down, I hated going near that door. Every time I approached it, I felt my stomach tighten. One night around 3 in the morning, I woke up to go to the bathroom. The hall was dark and I was half asleep. I heard something. It sounded like a whisper coming from the guest room. I can't say I heard words, but it was a low, muffled sound, like someone talking under their breath. My first thought was that my wife might be inside, maybe looking for something, but she was still in bed, sound asleep. I felt my chest tighten. It was that clench in my ribs you get when you sense something's not right. I stood in the hallway, a few feet from the guest room door. My hand moved toward the handle, but I hesitated. Then I heard it again. Faint, but definitely there. I pushed the door open. The corridor light swept across the bed, the chair in the corner, and the dresser against the wall. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed a shape near the foot of the bed. It was small, barely visible in the shadow. I felt a cold wave run through my spine. My mouth went dry and I couldn't move for a second. I blinked and it vanished. There was no noise, no gust of air. It just wasn't there anymore. I stood for a moment, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake my wife. I snapped on the room's overhead light and stared at every corner, even under the bed. Nothing. I backed out of there, flipped the switch off, and hurried to my bedroom. I laid awake for the rest of the night. My chest felt heavy, and the silence of the house became deafening. I listened for any little sound. I couldn't fall asleep again. The next morning, I forced myself to go back in. The curtains were closed, and the lamp was off, same as always. But the bedspread was rumpled, like someone had sat or slept there. I know how that bed looks when it's freshly made. My wife always pulls the cover tight. That morning, it looked used. I called my wife, and she came in, saw it, and frowned. She asked if I'd been in there during the night. I told her what happened. Her eyes widened, and she glanced around the room. She walked over to the bed, smoothed the cover, and ran her hand along the edges. Then she touched the pillow. It was warm, as if someone's head had been resting there. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me, then walked out. That day, I decided to talk to a couple of neighbors. They've lived on our street for decades. I asked if they knew anything about our house's past. They said the previous owner lived alone. They also said there were rumors of a personal tragedy, but nobody gave me specifics. Maybe they didn't know the details, or maybe it was just old gossip. I only got vague hints that something sad happened in that house a long time ago. That was enough to set me on edge. I wondered if there was some leftover energy or presence. I'm not a big believer in the paranormal, but I couldn't explain the stuff we were experiencing. A few nights later, I was watching TV with my wife in the living room. She dozed off on the couch. Around midnight, I heard movement in the hallway. It sounded like soft footsteps. My first instinct was to assume one of my in-laws might have dropped by and used the bathroom or something, but we were alone. I muted the TV and listened. The steps were slow, like someone walking carefully. Then there was a thump, like something lightly hitting the guest room door from the inside. My throat went dry and I felt that cold tension in my chest again. I got up and walked to the hallway. The door was closed, but it felt like someone was on the other side. I opened it quickly. The light from the living room spread across the floor. The chair in the corner was slightly turned, not in the same position as before. My wife and I rarely enter that room, so we don't move the furniture around. I couldn't explain it. I walked over and touched the back of the chair. The wood felt oddly cold. I stayed there for a minute, scanning the walls, the ceiling, the bed. No sign of anything. I put the chair back in its usual angle and left the light on when I walked out. I started sleeping poorly after that. I'd wake up at the smallest sound, expecting to hear whispers or see that silhouette again. Sometimes I'd get up and check the guest room just to calm myself down. The temperature difference was always there, like stepping into a fridge. My wife said she felt uneasy every time she passed by, but she tried to ignore it. She said it was just a room and that we shouldn't freak out over a few odd noises. A week later, she admitted she'd been having strange dreams. She told me she heard crying and a voice calling out in the night, but she couldn't remember the words. She said it felt close, like it was right beside her. She'd wake up with tears in her eyes, not understanding why. That bothered me. She's a logical person and doesn't get rattled easily. Seeing her so tense made me more uneasy. I suggested we store some boxes in the guest room, maybe keep the lights on for a few nights, see if anything changed. She agreed. We moved some old stuff inside, placed a few plastic bins against the walls, and left a small lamp on. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Then, on the 3rd night, the lamp was off in the morning, even though I remembered leaving it on. I checked the bulb. It wasn't burnt out. I turned the switch, and it lit up perfectly fine. I started feeling a knot in my stomach whenever I walked through the hallway, like I was holding my breath automatically. The house felt normal everywhere else. The living room was cozy. The master bedroom was the same as always. The kitchen was warm and inviting. But that guest room felt off. Even my in-laws refused to stay in there. They'd say something like, "We're good on the couch," whenever they visited. They didn't give a clear reason, but I saw them glance at that door. One evening, I decided to stand in the hallway and watch the door for a while. It felt strange, but I wanted to see if anything would happen if I just stood there quiet. My wife was at work. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood there for maybe 15 minutes just staring. I caught a faint scratching sound at one point. It was almost like nails on the wall or on the floor, but very soft. My palms got sweaty. I opened the door again. The light from the hallway spilled in. The scratching sound stopped. The bins we had stacked in the corner were untouched. The bed looked fine. I walked in and flipped the overhead light on. My breath caught when I saw the chair turned again. It was slight but noticeable. I walked over, set my hand on it, and felt that familiar cold. It was like it had been pulled away from the corner. I shoved it back. Then I turned around and left. My mind was racing. I started wondering if I was losing it, if I was seeing or feeling things that weren't actually there. That night, I talked to my wife about calling someone to check the place out, maybe an electrician or an inspector to see if there was a wiring issue or some structural anomaly. She agreed, so we called a local guy who had a good reputation for identifying cold spots, leaks, or anything unusual in old houses. He came by, checked the insulation, checked for mold, tested the HVAC system, even scanned the walls for moisture or cracks. He said everything was in perfect condition. He couldn't find any logical reason for that part of the house being colder. He left without a solution. After that visit, I tried to convince myself everything was fine. The next few nights were quiet. I managed to sleep better. Then, maybe a week later, around 1 in the morning, I woke up with that tingling feeling again. It was like my body knew something was off. I listened for a second. The house was still. My wife was asleep next to me, breathing softly. I got up and walked into the hallway, not even sure why. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper. It almost sounded like it came from right behind the guest room door. My pulse started racing. I felt my hands sweat. I reached for the knob and turned it slowly. The door creaked open and the hallway light poured across the floor. I saw nothing but the bed, the dresser, and the same old lamp on the nightstand. I stepped in. The whispering stopped. I could see my breath in the air like it was the middle of winter, even though it wasn't cold anywhere else in the house. My eyes flicked to the corner, to the chair, to the walls. Then I saw movement by the window. There was a shape there, small and indistinct. I froze. My breathing was shaky. I blinked, and it vanished again. At that moment, the lamp flickered. The bulb hummed, then went dark. I was left with only the corridor light. I backed away, closed the door, and hurried to my bedroom. I lay awake until dawn, wide-eyed and sweating. My heart was in my throat. I couldn't block out the image of that figure near the window. I kept thinking about the stories the neighbors mentioned, about the old occupant and some tragedy. I didn't know if there was a connection, but I couldn't deny the weird things happening in that room. My wife woke up around 7. She asked if I was okay, and I just shook my head. I said, "I can't deal with that room anymore. I don't want to go in there alone." She looked at me and nodded. She felt the same. I tried to go on with my life, ignoring it as much as possible. But every time I walked down the hallway, I felt that cold, uneasy spike in my gut. The house didn't feel entirely like home anymore. I caught myself avoiding the last few steps near that door. If I needed something from the hall closet, I walked quickly, grabbed what I needed, and left. My wife did the same. The sense of relief I felt each time I passed that door without hearing or seeing anything was intense. Right now, we keep that door shut at all times. There's a tension hanging in the air whenever we're in the hallway, especially at night. Sometimes I hear soft creaks from that room. Sometimes I think I see a shadow moving near the gap at the bottom of the door, but I try to brush it off. My wife and I hardly speak about it anymore. We don't have answers, and it scares us. We haven't told many people because we're afraid they won't believe us, or maybe they'll believe us too much, and that might make it worse. All I know is that the guest room feels occupied, even when it's empty. The bed still ends up with rumpled sheets from time to time. The chair keeps shifting its angle. The air still chills my bones when I cross that threshold. And there are those whispers always late at night, always faint and close to the door. I don't know how to explain any of it. I just know I'm not imagining things. Something is in there and I don't think it wants to leave. For now, I try to live with it. I lock the door sometimes, though it doesn't change anything. My wife and I are thinking about repainting the walls or changing the furniture, maybe turning the space into an office. But deep down, I'm not sure that will help. That room already feels claimed by something I can't touch or see for more than a split second. Every night I go to bed hoping I won't hear that soft voice or see that short figure. Every morning I wake up relieved the door is still shut, but I never feel completely safe. I'm not sure I ever will. I saw the footprints for the first time on a Wednesday night. I had been living in the house by myself for a week. I wasn't expecting anything strange. I thought it would be quiet, maybe a bit lonely, but I wanted that. I needed the isolation to finish my work project. My friends and I usually only use the house in the summer. During the winter, the place felt deserted. The local shops closed early, and I rarely heard voices or cars at night. It was just me, the wind, and the ocean. I had gone to bed around midnight. I was exhausted from a day of trying to meet a deadline. I woke up at about 3 in the morning, feeling thirsty. I got up, walked down the hall, and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house felt cold. The floor creaked. I noticed a damp smell like salt water. I assumed I had left a window open somewhere. There was a sliding glass door in the back that led straight to the sandy path toward the water. I checked it. It was locked. On my way back through the kitchen, I saw wet footprints on the tiles. They started near the door and ended halfway across the kitchen floor. I stopped and stared. My first thought was that maybe I had spilled something, but these were clear footprints, shaped like bare feet, leading from the door toward the center of the floor. They disappeared around the corner that leads to the living room. I followed them slowly. The footprints grew faint, and then they vanished completely by the time I reached the edge of the living room carpet. There was no puddle, no trail, nothing else. It was just those prints on the tile. I felt a knot in my stomach. I walked back to the door, checking every possible place someone could hide. I looked behind the couch. I checked closets. I opened the back door again and scanned the yard, though it was dark. The moonlight gave me just enough vision to see the empty sand. No one was there. I shut the door and locked it. I wiped up the footprints with paper towels. I told myself it had to be some weird moisture problem or a small leak. I tried to be logical. Maybe the wind blew some water in through the tiny gap under the door, but I knew that didn't make sense. Water doesn't form perfect footprints by accident. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every small noise in the house made me jump. My pulse pounded in my ears. I got up every half hour to check if there were new footprints. There weren't any more that night. The next day, I tried to ignore what happened. I focused on my work. I spent most of the morning at the small table in the living room, typing and reading. I looked at the back door every now and then. I didn't see anything unusual outside. Around noon, I took a break. I went out for a short walk on the beach. The wind stung my face. The sky was gray. The sand felt cold under my shoes. I saw a few seagulls. I didn't see any people. I liked the emptiness in the daytime because it gave me some peace. But I remembered those footprints. I tried not to think about it too much. That night, the same thing happened. I had gone to bed around 11, hoping to catch up on sleep. I woke up again close to 3 in the morning. This time, I heard a noise. It sounded like a soft thumping on the back door. It wasn't a single knock, but more like a series of dull hits. My heart raced. I stayed in bed for a few seconds, deciding what to do. Then I got up, grabbed the flashlight I kept on the nightstand, and moved slowly down the hall. My feet were cold against the wooden floor. When I reached the kitchen, I stood still and listened. The noise repeated. 3 slow knocks. The door rattled slightly, like someone was pressing on it. I flipped on the kitchen light. I felt my stomach tighten. I couldn't see anyone through the glass. I wondered if it was the wind or some loose branch hitting the door. The knocks came again, softer this time. I took a deep breath, grabbed the doorknob, and pulled the door open. No one stood there. I looked at the sand outside. I shined the flashlight around. No footprints. No sign of any person or animal. The wind pushed in a chilly gust. I smelled the salty air. I felt my breathing get heavier. I shut the door and locked it again. My hand trembled. Then I heard something in the hallway behind me, like something was dragging across the floor. The sound was low and heavy, like wet cloth sliding over the wood. I swung around and aimed my flashlight at the dark hall. The overhead light flickered. I tried the light switch a few times, but it kept blinking. I stepped forward and felt a chill run from my neck to my wrists. I moved the flashlight beam up and down the corridor. Nothing. I walked toward the living room. My shoes squeaked on the floor. I smelled something thick and salty like seaweed. It felt overwhelming, like opening a bag of rotting algae. I checked the living room. Everything was in its place. The overhead light kept flickering, but I managed to turn on a small lamp near the couch. I saw no movement. I listened for more sounds. It was silent, except for my own pulse and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on. I turned on the TV for background noise. I dozed off around sunrise. I slept on the couch because I didn't want to go back down that dark hallway. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck. I checked the floors again. I didn't see new footprints, but my nose still picked up that faint smell of seawater, even though the windows were all closed and the doors locked. I decided to step outside to see if there was any sign of someone hanging around. The beach was empty. I walked around the side of the house looking for footprints in the sand or signs of forced entry. There was nothing. It looked like the typical off-season scene: boarded-up houses, a few scattered pieces of driftwood, gulls circling overhead. I tried to call one of my friends who co-owned the house. I wanted to ask if he ever heard weird noises or saw footprints. He didn't pick up. I left a message telling him things felt strange here, and I asked if anything ever happened like this before. I checked my phone repeatedly throughout the day, but he didn't call back. That evening, I considered leaving. I had enough clothes to last a few more days, but I didn't feel comfortable. My work was going okay, but I couldn't focus at night with the fear that someone or something might be inside the house with me. I decided to give it one more night. I told myself maybe the house was just old. Sometimes old pipes cause weird sounds. Maybe the footprints were just a bizarre trick of condensation or something else. I knew that wasn't logical, but I tried to calm myself. I ate a simple dinner, a microwave meal, and a glass of water. I tried to stay awake as long as I could. I left every light on. I watched random shows on TV. Around midnight, I started to nod off. I felt tired, but also on edge. My muscles felt tense and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and decided to go to my bedroom. I left the bedroom light and the hallway light on. I closed the bedroom door, locked it, and went to bed. I woke up again around 3 in the morning. This time, I didn't hear knocks. I heard something scraping along the walls outside my room. It was a steady scratch, like nails against wood. My heart pounded. I felt sweat on my forehead. I reached for my phone. I wanted to call someone, but I realized I had no idea who would come out here in the middle of the night. The nearest police station was far, and I wasn't even sure if anything criminal was happening. I got up and unlocked my door. I opened it a crack and peeked into the hallway. I saw the overhead light flickering again, weaker this time. I smelled that same salty odor. The scratching noise grew louder. It sounded like it was right next to me, but I couldn't see anything. The corridor looked empty. I whispered, "Hello?" but got no answer. My mouth felt dry. I walked slowly forward, flashlight in hand. I kept glancing behind me. I felt like something was about to jump out. I reached the kitchen. Everything was dark. I flipped the switch, but the overhead light just flickered before going out completely. Only the stove light was on, casting a dim glow across the counter. I saw droplets of water on the floor. They formed a small trail leading from the back door to the center of the kitchen again. I crouched down and touched them. They were cold. I stood up and followed the droplets as they continued toward the living room. They ended right where the carpet started. I heard that dragging noise again, coming from the living room. I stepped in carefully. I flicked on the floor lamp. It kept blinking, but it stayed on enough for me to see the furniture. I noticed movement near the window. I turned, and for half a second I saw what looked like a figure standing by the curtains. It was tall, but I couldn't make out features. Then the lamp blinked off, and I couldn't see anything. My heart thundered in my chest. I heard wet footsteps on the carpet shuffling away from me. When the lamp flickered back on, there was no one there. The curtains were still. I ran to the window and pulled the curtains aside. No one outside. No footprints on the floor near the window. I just smelled that strong ocean odor, the kind of smell you get on a fishing boat. At that point, I felt my body shaking. My hands trembled, and my head throbbed. My breath came in short bursts. I turned on every remaining lamp and sat on the couch. I kept looking around, waiting for something else to happen. For a moment, I thought about grabbing my bag, getting in the car, and driving to the nearest motel. But I felt stuck. I kept thinking if I left, maybe I'd never figure out what was actually going on. Maybe this was just me losing my mind from lack of sleep. I'm not a believer in the supernatural. I usually need proof of something before I accept it, but I couldn't deny that wet footprints and the sounds were real. I could see them and hear them. I forced myself to stay awake until dawn. Once the sun came up, everything felt safer. The house looked normal in the daylight. The smell of salt was still there, but weaker. I checked the living room floor. It was dry with no sign of footprints. I didn't see any damage, no forced entry. I did notice the flickering lights in the kitchen even during the day. I tried changing a bulb, but it didn't help. I called an electrician, but he said he wouldn't be free for a few days. I told him it was urgent. He promised to try his best. Around noon, my friend finally called back. I explained what happened. He paused for a few seconds before answering. He said he never saw anything like that, but he also never stayed there alone in the winter. He told me to get out if I felt unsafe. I agreed. I said I'd pack up and leave. I spent about an hour gathering my stuff. I closed the windows, turned off all the appliances, and locked every door. I carried my suitcase to the car. I walked back inside for one last check. The living room was silent. The kitchen was quiet. I stepped into the hallway and headed to my bedroom to pick up my laptop bag. I saw fresh, wet footprints leading from my bedroom door toward the living room. They looked recent, like someone had just stepped out of the ocean and walked straight through the house. The footprints ended at the edge of the living room carpet. I froze. My heart pounded again. The air smelled like algae. I felt the hair on my arms rise. I didn't call out. I just walked quickly into the bedroom, grabbed my laptop, and hurried out of the house. I didn't bother cleaning up anything. I locked the front door, got in my car, and drove away. The whole time, I kept checking the rearview mirror. The beach and the house got smaller behind me. I still felt that tense feeling in my chest, like something was watching me. Now I'm staying at a friend's place in the city. I haven't been back to the beach house. My other friends have asked me for details. I just tell them what I saw. I don't speculate. There's nothing else to add. The footprints were there. The noise was real. The smell still lingers in my memory. At night, I sometimes dream about that house. I see footprints ending in the middle of the room. I hear knocks on the door. I smell the ocean when I wake up. I check my own apartment and everything is dry. But I can't forget those nights. I don't know what was inside that house. I don't know if it's still there. But I don't plan on staying alone in that place ever again. I moved into this building about 6 months ago, right after I started a new job downtown. The place is old, more than 100 years, with thick walls and a lot of dusty corners. The elevator sits in the middle of the lobby. It has a metal gate inside that you have to slide open and shut by hand. The exterior doors are heavy and creak when you pull them. The interior panel is scratched metal with buttons that sometimes stick. I noticed from day one that it looked worn. I wasn't too worried at first. I've seen older elevators in other buildings and most of them still work well enough, but things here feel different. On my first night moving in, the elevator jerked a bit when it started. I heard a loud thump somewhere above me, like something hitting the shaft. I shrugged it off. It was late, and I was tired. I pushed the button for the 4th floor, stood there, and stared at my reflection in the mirror on the back wall. I remember thinking I looked exhausted. The mirror had these rust spots along the edges. The elevator rattled and slowed, then stopped. The gate slid open easily, and I stepped into the corridor. The hallway light flickered. The entire floor smelled damp, like old concrete. I got into my apartment, unpacked a little, then fell asleep on the couch. Nothing strange happened that night beyond the usual old building stuff. A couple of weeks later, I left for work early in the morning. I got into the elevator and pushed the button for the lobby. The panel's little light bulbs behind the numbers were faint. It started going down, but instead of stopping at the 1st floor, it jerked again and came to a halt on the 7th floor. That didn't make any sense. I stood there waiting for the door to close again, but it opened wide. The corridor was dark. I didn't see anybody standing there. I kept waiting. I called out, "Hello?" Nobody answered. I'm not sure why, but my stomach tightened a bit. Something about that empty, dark hall gave me a chill. I pushed the button for the lobby again. The gate slid shut, and the elevator resumed its ride down. When I reached the lobby, I asked the doorman if someone had pressed the call button on 7. He said the 7th floor had been empty for years. He didn't offer any more details. I just nodded and left for work. Over the next few days, nothing else happened. I went to work, came back, used the stairs sometimes, used the elevator other times. The elevator felt creaky, but it worked. Then one night I got home later than usual. It was around 9. I was carrying a heavy bag of groceries, so I decided to take the elevator instead of the stairs. The moment I got in, I noticed the overhead light flickered. It does that occasionally, but that night it flickered more intensely. The panel buzzed when I pressed the button for the 4th floor. The gate closed and we started moving. A second later, we stopped at the 6th floor. The door opened. The hall lights were off. I looked out and saw nothing. It was silent. No one stepped in. Then the door shut again. The elevator went up one more floor, then back down, then up again, stuttering like it was confused. The movements felt rough. My heart started pounding because I wasn't sure if the elevator was about to break. Finally, it reached the 4th floor. The door opened, I rushed out, and the lights in the corridor were partially dim. I walked to my door, got inside, locked it, and put the groceries down. My hands were sweaty and my legs felt a bit shaky. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. I chalked it up to mechanical issues. 2 weeks later, I came home from work around 8 at night. I was in a hurry, so I called the elevator again. When the door slid open, the interior light was out. The only illumination came from the tiny bulb on the panel. It was enough to see the floor and the mirror, but it felt gloomy. I stepped inside and slid the gate closed. As I turned around to press the 4th floor button, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. It was like a shape behind me near my shoulder for half a second. I jumped and spun around. Nobody was there. My heart raced, and I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I told myself my eyes were playing tricks. I pressed the button again and waited. The elevator rose a bit, paused, and then opened on the 7th floor. That same pitch-dark hallway greeted me. I leaned forward to see if maybe the lights had burned out, or if a resident had turned them off. It was completely silent and still. No movement, no sound of footsteps. My hands felt clammy. I pressed the door close button. The door took a few seconds to respond. When it finally did, I heard a faint whisper. It was right by my ear, like someone breathing a single word I couldn't understand. My heart pounded. I was sure I felt warm breath on my neck. I spun around fast, checking the corners of the elevator. Still empty. The door slid shut, and the elevator started moving again. I stood there, my back against the panel, holding the railing. When it reached the 4th floor, I rushed out. My skin felt cold, and I was breathing hard. I hurried to my apartment and locked myself in. Later that night, I sat on my couch with the lights on. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the whisper was the elevator's mechanical hiss. Maybe the shape in the mirror was a reflection of the corridor light flickering. But it felt off. My hands were shaky, and I kept thinking I heard faint noises in the hallway outside. I decided to check the building's history. I went online, searched the address, and dug through old newspaper archives. I found a small article dated a few decades ago. It mentioned a serious accident with the elevator. The article said there was a problem with the protective gate. It didn't give many details, but it implied that the elevator had malfunctioned and injured someone badly. The building management at the time had been fined for neglect. That was all I found. I closed my laptop and tried to sleep. But every time I dozed off, I heard that whisper in my mind. For a while, I avoided the elevator. I took the stairs whenever possible. My legs were burning after climbing 4 floors every day, but I didn't want to deal with that flickering light or random stops. One night, the stairs were blocked by cleaning equipment. A maintenance worker was mopping and had big buckets in the way. I decided to bite the bullet and take the elevator again. It was almost midnight. I was exhausted from a long day at work. I stepped inside, pressed the button, and stared straight at the floor. The elevator shook a bit and started moving. Right when I thought it would go smoothly, it slammed to a stop at the 5th floor, jerked, and the doors opened. The corridor light was dim, but at least it wasn't pitch black. Nobody was there. I waited for the door to close. It took longer than usual. I felt a prickling along my neck as if someone stood behind me. The mirror was to my left, so I glanced over. At first, I only saw my reflection. Then the reflection kind of warped for a second, like the image flickered. I saw a shape pass behind me. I turned around and looked. Nothing. My breath caught in my throat. The elevator door finally closed. It started moving again, and I felt my knees go weak. My body felt tight, and my breathing was shallow. When I got to the 4th floor, I practically jumped out before the doors were fully open. I kept my distance from that thing for the next month. I sometimes heard strange mechanical noises echo through the stairwell, like the elevator was shuddering or clanging. The doorman said the building manager had called a repair crew a couple of times. They found some issues with the wiring and a misaligned door sensor. They supposedly fixed it, but the weird stops kept happening. People in the building talked about it in hushed voices. Some residents said they only used the elevator if they had a lot of bags. Others said they had seen the doors open on random floors late at night. Everyone assumed it was old wiring and nothing more. Then one night around 7, I was bringing takeout home. I had a big bag, so I got in the elevator, hoping I'd make it to the 4th floor without an incident. The elevator started up normally, but it stopped at the 1st floor before it even got going. The door opened, but I didn't see anyone in the lobby. Then it closed right away and continued upward. It stopped again at the 3rd floor, opened, no one there. This time I noticed a weird smell like burning plastic. The overhead light flickered, and the mirror looked warped in the corners. The door shut slowly, and the elevator resumed its climb. My pulse was racing. I gripped the railing. The next stop was the 7th floor again. I exhaled sharply. The corridor was dark, the same as before. The door stayed open. I set my takeout bag on the floor and leaned out a bit. No movement, no lights. Then I heard a faint sound, like a scratch, coming from somewhere in the hallway. I strained my ears but couldn't locate the source. Suddenly, the elevator's buzzer rang. That little bell that's supposed to signal an emergency, or that someone pressed the help button. I hadn't touched it. I jumped, almost stumbling backward. My heart hammered. The buzzer went on for about 5 seconds, then stopped abruptly. The door slid shut by itself. The elevator dropped a bit, like it lost power. I clutched the side. It caught itself, then went down to the 4th floor and opened the door. I grabbed my takeout, jumped out, and ran to my door. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely fit the key into the lock. Inside my apartment, I set the food on the counter and leaned against the wall. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I felt a rush of adrenaline, like I'd just been chased. My breathing was ragged. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to do anything but sit and try to calm down. I turned the TV on for background noise. I kept thinking about how that buzzer rang on its own. There was no reason for it to go off. Usually you have to press a button in the elevator to trigger that sound. I wondered if there was a short circuit or some mechanical error, but the way it started and stopped so abruptly made me feel uneasy. After that, I tried to find more details about the accident from years ago. I spoke with an older resident, a man who'd lived there for decades. He said the gate had malfunctioned, and a person got trapped between floors for a while. He mentioned that the person's injuries were severe, but he didn't say they died or anything like that. There was a rumor that this individual never fully recovered. Some neighbors believed that something remained in the elevator. I asked him if he ever experienced weird stops or random door openings. He just nodded and said, "That elevator doesn't work right. Hasn't for decades." He wouldn't elaborate. He just walked away. That conversation left me feeling tense. Every time I use the elevator now, I feel my muscles tighten. My heart beats faster. I try not to look in the mirror, but it's hard not to glance. That reflective surface is right there, covering almost half the back wall. I've seen movements that don't line up with my own reflection. I've heard faint breathing, and I've felt someone behind me. Sometimes there's a soft laugh right next to my ear, and I can't tell if it's a trick of the building's old structure or something else. Once the overhead light turned off completely while I was inside, and for a second, I was in pitch black. I pushed the button for my floor repeatedly, and it came back on, showing me the empty space around me. My throat was dry. My hands were slippery with sweat. I told the building manager about everything. He shrugged and said they've done all they can. The elevator passes inspections, though barely. The city inspector only checks for major safety hazards, not for random stops or doors opening on the wrong floors. The manager said he'd try to schedule another check, but that was a week ago, and I haven't heard anything new. Last night, I got home and saw the elevator door was ajar. I leaned in and said, "Hello?" The corridor was empty and the lobby was quiet. I could hear the street noise outside. Nothing moved inside the elevator. The interior light was on, and it seemed steady. I considered taking the stairs, but I was dead tired after a long shift. I got in, pulled the metal gate shut, and pressed the button. The elevator rattled, then rose smoothly for once. I thought maybe it had been fixed. Halfway up, it stopped. The door didn't open. The overhead light flickered. I stood there, feeling trapped. My arms felt cold. Then it started moving again, paused at the 3rd floor, and continued. Finally, it arrived at the 4th floor. The door opened, and I rushed out, practically stumbling into the hallway. My body was tense, but I felt relief. At least it hadn't opened on the 7th floor again. Right now, I'm in my apartment, thinking about getting out of this lease. The building has a certain charm with its high ceilings and old tiles, but the elevator issues are wearing me down. I keep replaying those moments when the door opened on empty floors, the corridor lights off, or that strange whisper near my ear. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched whenever I'm inside that elevator. The reflection in the mirror almost feels like it belongs to someone else sometimes. I've thought about calling an elevator repair company myself, but that's the manager's job. I'm on a tight budget. Plus, I'm not sure what a technician could do if the mechanical parts seem fine. The random stops and weird noises don't happen during regular hours, as far as I can tell. It's mostly at night. The doorman says he hears the elevator moving on its own sometimes, but every time he checks, there's nothing. No evidence of a stuck button or a jammed gate. For now, I try to avoid using the elevator late at night. If I come home after 8, I'll usually take the stairs, even with groceries. My legs have gotten stronger from all the climbing. When I do have to use it, I keep my eyes forward or closed. I press my floor number and ignore the mirror. I grip the railing if it starts shaking. If it stops on the wrong floor, I stand still until it closes again, and I don't step out. Every time the door closes and the elevator resumes its journey, I feel my heart pounding, waiting for a whisper or some unexplained breath on my neck. That's my life now, in this old building downtown. The rent is cheap and the location is convenient, but the elevator is a constant source of anxiety. I can't explain all the weird things that happen inside it. I don't know if there's some lingering presence from that old accident, or if it's just a malfunctioning piece of machinery. All I know is that every time I step inside, I brace myself. I wait for the door to open on a dark floor, or for the buzzer to ring, or for the mirror to show something behind me that isn't really there. And that's how it's been, night after night, in this place that I once thought was just another historic building with old wiring. I don't know what it is exactly, but I can't ignore it anymore. I remember the day I brought my grandfather's painting into my apartment. It was the same painting that had been in my parents' living room for as long as I could remember. It showed a calm lake with a single oak tree on the shore. The sky was a bright shade of blue, and there were small clouds in the distance. My grandfather had painted it before he passed away. I always felt drawn to it, even as a kid. After my parents died, I inherited the painting and decided to hang it on the main wall in my living room. It felt right to have it there. I had no idea I would start noticing strange things within a few days. On the first night, I sat on my couch after a long day of unpacking. I turned on a small lamp next to me and glanced at the painting. The water's reflection looked darker than I remembered. The outline of the oak tree on the lake's surface seemed a bit distorted, like someone had smudged the paint. I leaned in to look closer. but I wasn't sure if I was just tired or if it was truly different. I shrugged it off and went to bed, thinking I was just stressed. The next morning I made coffee and looked at the painting again. Under the sunlight from the window, it looked normal. The reflection wasn't as dark as it had seemed the night before, and the leaves on the tree looked fine. I felt a little silly for worrying about it. I convinced myself I was imagining things. But around noon, as I walked past it, I felt a slight chill on my arms. The painting seemed to draw my attention again. That's when I noticed a cluster of leaves near the top of the tree that looked slightly withered, like they were losing color. I didn't remember seeing that. The rest of the tree looked healthy and green, but that small patch looked dry. I stood there for a minute, staring at the painting. Then I stepped back, trying to see if there was a trick of the light. I turned on an overhead light, but it only made the spot more noticeable. I touched the surface gently. It felt like any other painted canvas, smooth and a little uneven where the brushstrokes were thick. I didn't feel wet paint or any weird texture. I just saw a small area that looked different from my memory. Over the next few days, I felt more uneasy. I started to notice small changes every time I looked at the painting. One afternoon, I swore I saw a small dark shape near the base of the oak tree. It could have been a rock or a shadow, but I was sure it hadn't been there before. I couldn't remember every tiny detail from my childhood, but I had spent years staring at that painting in my parents' house. That shape stood out. It looked like an animal crouched down, or maybe just a cluster of brushstrokes that formed a shape my mind turned into an animal. I couldn't tell. I tried to focus on my daily routine, but I found myself glancing at the painting too often. Each time, my stomach tightened a bit because I thought I might see something else that didn't fit my memories. On the fourth night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept dreaming about my grandfather. In the dream, he stood by the lake and called my name. He didn't look upset or angry. He just looked focused. I could see his lips move, though I didn't hear clear words. I felt stuck in place, like my feet were glued to the ground. Then I saw the oak tree in the background, and it looked enormous, almost bigger than the frame of the painting. I woke up sweaty, breathing fast. I jumped up and switched on the living room light. The painting looked normal at first glance, but then I noticed a faint outline of something near the trunk of the tree. It looked like a human figure in the distance. It wasn't detailed. It was more like a faint smudge, shaped like a person standing there. I rubbed my eyes and moved closer. My hands were shaking a little. I touched the painting again, pressing my fingers against that area. It was dry. The figure was there, but it was very faint. I didn't sleep much that night. I paced around my living room. I tried to find reasons for what was happening. Maybe the painting was old. Paint can crack or change color over time. Maybe the light in my apartment was different from my parents' house. But I couldn't explain how these details seemed to appear almost overnight. I decided to take a photo with my phone so I could compare it to the painting day by day. The next morning, I took another photo in the same spot and at the same time of day. I compared the two images and noticed the figure was slightly darker than it had been in the first photo. My heart pounded when I saw it. It was still a vague shape, but it looked more solid. I zoomed in and saw a hint of a head and shoulders. It wasn't just a random smudge anymore. I deleted the photo, then took a fresh set of pictures from different angles. In every shot, the figure was there. I tried to calm myself by fixing a late breakfast, but I felt like someone was watching me. That evening, I decided to keep the lights on in the living room before I went to bed. I slept on the couch because my mind kept jumping back to those images on my phone. Around 2 a.m., I woke up from another dream about my grandfather. This time, he was waving at me from the shore of the lake. His mouth was moving again, but I heard only faint sounds like distant wind. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned on the bright overhead light and looked at the painting. My body tensed up. The figure was clearer now. It looked like a person standing behind the oak tree, leaning forward to peek out from behind the trunk. I grabbed my phone and took more photos. My hands were shaking so much that some pictures came out blurry. I wiped sweat from my forehead and took a few more. Then I sat down at my kitchen table to look at them. In each picture, the figure seemed to have a slight forward tilt, like it was trying to step out. I felt a tightness in my chest. I drank some water and forced myself to breathe slowly, but my nerves didn't settle. Over the next week, I tried everything I could think of to make sense of this. I used different phones, different cameras, different lighting. The images always showed the figure. Sometimes it looked darker or closer to the foreground. Some days, the leaves of the oak tree looked more wilted than before. The reflections in the water grew heavier and murkier, like the water itself had turned muddy. I even tried wiping the painting with a dry cloth, but nothing changed. I talked to a friend about it, but I left out the details. I just said I was stressed about old family stuff. I couldn't bring myself to explain that I thought my grandfather's painting was changing in front of my eyes. One night I felt so unsettled that I decided to move the painting to a spare room. I took it off the wall and carried it carefully. As I moved it through the hallway, I felt like the air turned cold for a moment. My arms got goosebumps. I stood still, holding the painting against my chest, until I felt normal again. Then I put it down in the spare room and leaned it against a wall. I closed the door. I thought maybe if I didn't see it, I wouldn't obsess over it. Maybe the changes would stop. But I still couldn't sleep. I felt drawn to that spare room. I kept picturing my grandfather in that dream, motioning for me to come closer. My heart felt heavy. I walked to the door, turned the knob, and opened it. The room was dark except for the faint streetlight coming through the window. The painting was there, tilted against the wall. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed that the figure seemed to be standing in front of the tree now, not half hidden behind it. It was out in the open, next to the trunk. I felt short of breath. My body was stiff and my mouth went dry. I switched on the ceiling light and stepped closer. I saw more details in the figure. It looked like a person with a blurred face. The clothes were dark, almost the same color as the shadows by the trunk. My hands shook. I wanted to drop the painting and run, but I also wanted to figure out what was happening. I took more photos, then walked backward out of the room and closed the door. I stayed awake until the sun came up, just scrolling through the pictures over and over again. In the morning, I tried to eat something, but my stomach felt tight. I started searching online for any explanation. Maybe there was some chemical in the paint that reacted to humidity or temperature. I spent hours reading about old oil paintings and how they can change color over time, but none of it explained an entire figure forming out of nowhere. That evening, I decided to take the painting back into the living room. I was tired of hiding it. I wanted to confront it, as strange as that sounds. I wanted to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I placed it on the wall again and sat down in front of it, keeping my phone ready. I waited. Nothing happened at first. I felt silly, like someone expecting a magic trick. After an hour or so, I got up to grab some water. Then I heard a soft scratching sound. My skin prickled. It sounded like something rubbing against canvas, but it was so faint I wasn't even sure I heard it. I rushed back in and looked at the painting. The figure seemed to have taken another step forward. It was closer to the lake's edge, almost at the shoreline. I took more pictures. My breathing was shallow. I felt my heart thudding. I stared at the painting for a long time, barely blinking. I didn't see it move in real time, but every time I checked the photos later, the figure looked closer to the edge. That night, I had another dream of my grandfather. He stood near the oak tree, looking at me in silence. He reached out his hand, but I stayed still. I woke up with my face damp from sweat. My neck ached from sleeping in a weird position on the couch. I forced myself to walk over to the painting in the bright morning light. The figure had reached the water's edge. I spent the next few days trying to live normally, but my mind was on the painting. I cooked meals, went to work, came home, and the first thing I did was check the painting. At times, it looked like the figure had stopped moving, but then I'd compare the newest photo to the older ones and notice a slight change in position. The leaves on the oak tree looked drier. The sky looked a bit more gray. I even thought I saw a ripple in the water. It was as if the painting had an internal logic that was shifting day by day. One morning I woke up and found that the figure was standing at the edge of the canvas, looking out toward the frame. My heart pounded so hard that I felt dizzy. It gave me the impression that it was about to step out of the painting into the room. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed the painting off the wall and turned it around so the front faced the wall. I spent an hour trying to calm down. My throat felt tight, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. I kept it facing the wall for 2 days. I couldn't bring myself to look at it. On the third night, though, I felt this urge to check it again. My fingers twitched when I reached for it. I turned it around slowly. For a second, I hesitated, bracing myself for some new detail. But all I saw was the same lake, the same oak tree, and the same figure. It hadn't moved further. It was still standing at the very edge of the water looking out. Its features were still vague. I looked for signs of anything else, but it was too murky to see any face. I exhaled and felt a small amount of relief. That night, I slept a full 6 hours for the first time in weeks. I woke up feeling a bit more relaxed. The painting was in the corner, propped against the wall. I went over to it in the morning light. The colors looked a bit pale, but the figure was unchanged. I decided to keep it. I didn't want to destroy something my grandfather made, especially since my parents had cherished it. I don't fully understand how it changed or why it changed. I don't know if my grandfather was trying to send me a message. Maybe it's just my own mind playing tricks on me, fueled by grief and stress. I still check the painting every day. I keep records of the photos and see if anything has shifted. Sometimes I think I hear soft scratching at night, but I try to ignore it. The figure hasn't moved any closer. The oak tree still looks wilted. The sky stays dull. Maybe it's frozen like that now. Or maybe I'm just used to it. I don't know. But every time I look at that figure, I feel a tightness in my chest. I don't think it's just paint. It feels like someone is trapped inside. And sometimes when I'm alone in the apartment at night, I wonder if it's just waiting for the right moment to leave that frame. I grip the steering wheel and stare into the rearview mirror. I see that shape again just for a second. It's a shadow on the back seat. It disappears as soon as I shift my eyes toward the actual seat. There's nothing there. There's never anything there. But I feel something. My neck tightens, and I get a prickly sensation on my arms. I've been doing deliveries for a few years, and I got used to driving alone. I liked the quiet. I enjoyed the freedom. Lately, though, I've been feeling uneasy. This old van is starting to creep me out, and I'm not sure if I can keep this up much longer. I bought the van about 6 months ago from a used lot. The dealer told me the previous owner had an accident a few months before. The details were vague. The inside of the van smelled like old seat cushions and stale coffee. The ceiling fabric sags a bit, and there's a rip on the driver's seat that pokes my thigh sometimes. The dashboard has a few cracks and the radio barely works, but it was all I could afford. I needed something to haul boxes and small crates for my delivery job. At first it ran fine, no strange sounds, no stalls. It passed inspection. It burned some oil, but that wasn't a big deal. It was enough to get me started. The first time I noticed anything odd was on an early morning run. I left the warehouse around 5 a.m., still dark out. The roads were empty, and the only light came from the street lamps and my headlights. I heard a soft rustling in the back as if the seat covers were shifting on their own. I glanced in the mirror and saw a shape. It looked like someone was sitting in the middle of the bench seat leaning forward. My heart jumped, and I whipped around. Nothing. The seat was empty. I turned back to the mirror. No shape. Just the seatbelt lying across the cushion. I shook my head and told myself I was tired. Maybe I needed more coffee. I tried to ignore it for a while. I focused on my job. My days usually start early. I load the van, check the manifest, plan my route, and hit the road. Sometimes I do 30 stops a day. Sometimes fewer if the packages are larger or if I have to drive to different towns. At first, I only noticed the shape once every few days. It was always out of the corner of my eye. It never moved when I looked at it directly. I figured it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but it felt real enough to make my stomach knot up. I talked to a couple of coworkers about it during lunch breaks. We sit in a small staff area with vending machines and a beat-up table. I told them about the shape in my back seat, how it made me jump. They laughed. One guy said, "Dude, it's probably just your jacket sliding around." Another said, "You're spending too much time alone. Find a driving buddy." They made jokes about me scaring myself, about how they see weird stuff too when they're half asleep at the wheel. I laughed with them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As weeks went by, the shape started appearing more often. Sometimes I'd be driving down a busy street in the afternoon, and I'd catch a glimpse of a dark outline in the mirror. I'd feel my legs tense up. My arms would tighten on the wheel. Then I'd look back and the seat was empty again. I'd try to brush it off. But the van felt heavier, like there was extra weight behind me. I even checked the tires and suspension once, thinking maybe there was a problem with the shocks. Everything looked normal. One evening I was finishing my last delivery around 7 p.m. The sky was dark, and it had been raining all day. The roads were slick, and the windshield kept fogging up. I was tired, hungry, and ready to get home. I pulled up to the customer's address, jumped out, and walked to the back of the van to unload a box. The customer lived in a small complex with poor lighting, and I had to use my phone's flashlight to see the ground. When I opened the rear doors, I got a weird chill. The inside of the van felt colder than outside. I could see my breath in the beam of my phone's light. There was no reason for it to be that cold. The engine was still running, and normally that keeps some heat in the cabin. I shrugged it off and grabbed the box. My hands trembled a bit, and the box almost slipped. I delivered it, said goodnight to the customer, and walked back to the driver's seat. When I got in, I saw droplets of water on the rearview mirror. They were on the inside of the glass as if someone had touched it with wet fingers. The rest of the windshield and mirrors were dry on the inside. Only that mirror was dotted with moisture. My chest tightened. I grabbed a rag from the passenger seat and wiped it off. I looked back at the rear seat. Empty. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and told myself to calm down. Then I drove back to the warehouse to clock out. I felt an itch on my neck the whole way, as if someone was leaning over my shoulder. The next day I kept expecting to see that shape in the mirror, but it didn't show up until midday on a stretch of highway between towns. It was bright out and the sun was high. I glanced at the mirror to change lanes and saw a dark silhouette behind me. It filled the seat, a tall figure maybe leaning against the window. I shouted and jerked the wheel. My van swerved to the right and I almost sideswiped a small sedan. The driver honked. I straightened the wheel and forced my eyes forward. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. I slowed down and took the next exit. I pulled into a gas station, parked in a corner spot, and turned around. Nothing in the back. I ran a hand over my face and tried to stop trembling. My shirt was stuck to my back. I was sweating so much. People at the pumps were staring at me, probably wondering why I parked so abruptly. I got out, slammed the door, and paced around the van. I wanted to calm down. I checked the tire pressure. I opened the side door and looked at the seat. There was a small tear in the upholstery, a few stains and some leftover crumbs from my lunch. It smelled like wet cardboard. Nothing else was weird. I kicked the tire and told myself I was being paranoid. Then I got back in and finished my route, but my nerves were fried. That night I tried to sleep, but I kept imagining that shape in my room, sitting in a corner, watching me. For the next few weeks I tried different tricks. I hung a small towel over the rearview mirror. I told my boss the mirror was cracked and I was waiting to replace it. He didn't care as long as I got my deliveries done. Driving without looking into that mirror felt strange, but it gave me some relief. I didn't see the shape, and I started to relax. But I realized I needed the mirror sometimes to change lanes safely. Whenever I lifted the towel, I'd get that uneasy feeling again, so I kept it covered most of the time. I considered selling the van. But I still owed money on it, and I couldn't afford another vehicle. My coworkers teased me every time I mentioned feeling creeped out. They never saw anything in their vans. They told me to listen to music or a podcast to keep my mind off the weird stuff. I tried that. I blasted rock music or random talk shows. It helped drown out my thoughts, but it didn't erase the feeling that I wasn't alone. One afternoon, I was making a short run across town. Traffic was heavy. I was crawling along the boulevard at 10 miles per hour. I noticed the smell of cigarettes in the van. I don't smoke, and I keep the windows closed when the AC is on, but I could smell fresh tobacco. It was strong. I reached out and turned off the AC. The smell was still there. It felt like someone had lit a cigarette right behind me. I glanced in the side mirror. Nothing unusual. I risked a look in the rearview mirror. The towel was off because I'd forgotten to put it on earlier. The shape was there, close to me, as if it was sitting right behind my seat. My heart hammered. I had nowhere to go. Traffic was bumper to bumper. I felt sweat dripping from my forehead. The radio was on, but it sounded muffled, like it was in another room. The shape didn't move. It just stayed there, a dark outline. Then a horn blared. The line of cars was moving, and I hadn't noticed. I pressed the gas and moved forward. I checked the mirror again. It was gone. The cigarette smell faded. I felt my shoulders relax a bit, but then I realized my breathing was shallow, and I couldn't stop my hands from shaking on the wheel. I pulled over as soon as I could and parked in a lot behind a grocery store. My stomach cramped, and I leaned my head on the steering wheel. I mumbled to myself, "Enough of this. Enough." I took a few sips from a water bottle and decided to finish my deliveries for the day. I still had 3 stops left, and I needed the money. But I made a plan. After work, I would talk to my boss and see if I could use one of the spare company vans for a while. Maybe I could sell this one, or keep it only for personal errands. That evening, when I got back, I told my boss I was having mechanical issues with my van. He said they'd let me use a company vehicle for a few days, but not permanently. The company vans have higher capacity, and they're strict about who gets to drive them. He said I'd have to sort out my problems with my personal van soon. I accepted that. I figured a few days away from my own van might help me calm down and see if I was just imagining things. Driving the company van felt like a relief. It was newer, with working AC and a decent sound system. I didn't see anything weird in the rear view. I didn't smell cigarette smoke or feel that cold presence. After a few days, my boss asked if I had fixed my van. I lied and said I had. He said I needed to switch back so the next driver could use the company van. I felt my stomach sink. That night, I stared at my keys on the kitchen table, dreading the next day. The following morning, I got in my old van and sat for a moment before starting the engine. I gripped the wheel and scanned the back seat. It was still and empty. I turned the key. The engine struggled, then roared to life, coughing a bit. I had a short route that day, mostly in town. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. I started to think maybe my brake had helped me get rid of the anxiety. But around midday, I approached a familiar intersection. The traffic light was red. I slowed down, checked my side mirrors, and then glanced at the rearview mirror. The shape was there again, but it seemed closer than before. It took up most of the reflection. I felt a chill on my scalp. My breath caught in my throat. The light turned green, and I drove through the intersection. My pulse throbbed in my neck. I couldn't look back again. I kept my eyes on the road, ignoring the mirror. My hands tingled from how hard I was gripping the steering wheel. I wanted to scream or pull over and run away. I delivered my last package and went straight back to the warehouse. I skipped talking to my coworkers. I clocked out and left. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the mirror, hoping not to see anything. Every time I peeked, the seat was empty, but I felt tense. I could feel something behind me pressing on the back of my seat. When I parked in front of my apartment, I sat there, engine off, in silence. The streetlights flickered. I felt the seat behind me push slightly. I heard the fabric rub against itself. My eyes darted to the mirror, and for a split second, I saw that shape. Just the outline of a head and shoulders, unmoving. Then it was gone. I almost jumped out of the van, but I forced myself to close the windows, lock the doors, and step out calmly. My legs wobbled as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. All night, I tossed and turned. I couldn't stop thinking about that silhouette behind me. My chest felt heavy. Right now, I'm sitting on my couch staring at the keys to that van. I keep remembering that cold feeling, the sight of the shape in the mirror, the smell of cigarettes that isn't mine. My coworkers don't believe me. I can't afford another van. I'm torn between keeping my job and keeping my sanity. Part of me wants to quit. Part of me thinks I need to push through. But every time I feel that pressure in the back seat, I question why I'm doing this. Every time I see that shape in the mirror, my heart pounds like it's going to burst. I don't know how much longer I can stand it. Tomorrow I have to get up early and drive again. I don't want to, but I need to pay my bills. I'm not sure how this will end. For now, I'll just close my eyes and hope I can sleep without seeing that figure waiting in the back seat of my van. I never expected to feel uneasy in my own apartment. I chose this unit on the 7th floor because it was cheap, had a decent layout, and came with a view of the street below. The building is old, with creaky floors and paint peeling in some corners of the hallways. The elevator sometimes rattles and the lights in the lobby flicker. But none of that bothered me before. I moved in a few months ago, and everything was fine until about 2 weeks ago. It was a Wednesday night around 10 o'clock. I was sitting on my couch in the living room with the lights off, watching some late-night show. The window faces an empty lot across the street, so there's not much to look at outside. I usually keep the curtains drawn at night, especially because I don't want people in the building next door looking in. There's a gap between our buildings, but you never know who might have a telescope or something. Anyway, I was half asleep on the couch when I noticed the curtain shift. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. There was no breeze and the windows were closed. The old wooden frames sometimes let a little draft in, but nothing that would make the fabric move that noticeably. I paused the TV and stayed quiet for a moment. I felt my heart start to beat faster. I don't spook easily, but I also don't like unexplained stuff. I leaned forward. The curtain twitched again like someone was standing behind it, nudging it with a hand or a shoulder. I stood up, walked toward the window, and reached out to grab the curtain. Before I touched it, I realized I could see a dark shape through the cloth. It was faint, but it definitely looked like a shape bigger than my hand or a stray object. It looked like a person's outline, but it was almost blended into the darkness. My mouth went dry. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My first thought was that someone had broken in and was hiding behind the curtain, but my apartment is on the 7th floor. The only entry points are the front door and the small fire escape window in the bedroom. That window is always locked, and it's too small for an adult to climb through without making a racket. My pulse hammered. I took a step back. Then I rushed to the light switch near the couch, flipped it on, and turned around to see who it was. The curtain was just hanging there, and there was no one behind it. I walked over, pulled it back, and looked. There was nothing on the windowsill and nothing outside except the darkness of the street. I rubbed my eyes and checked all around the living room, even in the corners where I keep some boxes and an old lamp I never use. Nobody was there. I sat back down on the couch, trying to calm down. I grabbed my phone, checked the time, and realized it had only been a few minutes since I first noticed the curtain move. It felt longer. My chest was tight, and my breathing was shallow. I told myself I was imagining things because I was tired. I turned off the TV and went to bed. I tried to forget about it. I thought it would just be a weird one-time experience. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept picturing the silhouette behind the curtain. I kept imagining that it was standing there, just looking at me through the thin fabric. I would toss and turn, check the clock, and force my eyes shut again. By the time my alarm went off in the morning, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. For the next few days, nothing strange happened. I came home from work, turned on the lights, and made my usual microwave dinners. I watched TV in the evenings, sometimes with the lights off, sometimes with them on. Everything was calm. Then, on Sunday, I got back from the grocery store around 6 in the evening. I walked into my living room and saw the curtain was slightly pulled back. It looked like someone had been peeking outside. I always make sure the curtains are fully drawn when I leave, especially on weekends. It's just a habit I have. So that immediately made me uneasy. I set my bags down, walked to the window, and checked outside. The street was normal. A couple of cars parked, a few people walking by. Nothing else. I touched the curtain. It felt cold. My stomach tightened. I yanked it fully closed again and checked the rest of the apartment. My front door had been locked. My bedroom was fine. The bathroom was empty. All my stuff was in place. Nothing else looked off. I called the building's caretaker, Mr. Ramos. He's a quiet guy in his 50s who sweeps the hallways and keeps track of visitors. I told him someone might have been in my apartment. He said he hadn't seen anyone go up who wasn't a resident. I asked if maybe the lock was faulty. He shook his head. He said he checks the main doors, the stairwell, and the elevator cameras. Nobody came in. He told me he was sure no one had broken into my place. Then he just walked away, mumbling something about how old the building was, but that was it. Over the next few days, I started to feel paranoid. I'd leave for work, lock my door, and then check it again before I pressed the button for the elevator. When I came back in the evening, I'd walk straight to the window. Sometimes the curtain was still closed. Sometimes it was a little open. It wasn't every day, but it was often enough to freak me out. I even tried leaving a piece of tape on the curtain to see if it got moved, and sure enough, when I came home 2 days later, the tape was on the floor. It made no sense. There's no draft strong enough to pull the curtain that far. I asked Mr. Ramos again. He just sighed and said he hadn't noticed anything unusual. He had the same answer every time. He swore that no one without permission got past the lobby doors. I checked the windows for any sign of forced entry. Nothing. I tried sleeping in the living room one night, with the light off and the TV muted, just waiting to see if something would happen. Nothing did, at least while I was awake. But I woke up around 2 in the morning and the curtain looked a bit parted. It was dark in the room, so I couldn't see clearly, but I was sure there was a gap in the middle. My heart pounded. I felt a chill on my arms. I got up and turned on the lights again. I tore the curtain wide open. No one was there, and the street below was empty. I started to wonder if I was sleepwalking or losing my mind. But I've never had those issues before. I set up a cheap webcam on my desk, pointed at the window, hoping to record anything strange. I let it run overnight, and then I checked the footage in the morning. At first, I saw nothing but me messing around before bed. Then the screen went dark for a while. I fast-forwarded. Around 3:15 a.m., the curtain seemed to move. It was a subtle motion. The webcam resolution wasn't great, but I could see the fabric shift, and it looked like the shape of a hand pushing from behind. It was one single motion, then nothing. My stomach sank. I replayed it a few times. It wasn't my imagination. Something was there. I took the footage to Mr. Ramos. He shrugged and said maybe it was a draft or the building settling. The windows in this building are old and sometimes random pockets of air slip in. I told him that shape looked like a hand. He just stared at the screen, then looked at me. He said he'd keep an eye on the security cameras in the halls. That was all he promised. I felt frustrated. I wanted to change apartments or break the lease, but that would cost more money than I have right now. I also didn't want to sound like a lunatic to my boss, who would ask why I needed extra cash or time off. I decided I would handle it on my own. I searched every inch of my apartment for hidden entrances or secret panels in the walls. I found nothing. I tried pushing on the hallway walls outside my door to see if there was some hidden door or something weird. The building's old, but nothing seemed out of place. Meanwhile, the curtain kept moving. Some nights, it was quiet. Other nights, I'd be watching TV and catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. I'd turn my head, and the curtain would be still. One time I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water, left the living room lights off, and came back to find the curtain pulled back at least a foot, as if someone had stuck their head out to see the street. My heart pounded so hard that my hands shook. I grabbed the curtain and yanked it shut. My mind was racing. I couldn't figure out how or why this was happening. I bought a cheap motion sensor online and set it up near the window. I tested it by waving my hand in front of it, and it beeped. The first few nights it stayed silent. Then, one Thursday around midnight, I heard a soft beep from the living room. I was in the bedroom, half asleep. The sound jolted me awake. My skin prickled and I felt sweat trickle down my back. I jumped up, grabbed the baseball bat I keep in my closet, and ran to the living room. The sensor was on, but I saw no one. The curtain looked normal. I stood there with the bat raised, scanning every corner. The only noises were my ragged breathing and the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I walked over to the motion sensor, reset it, and checked if maybe it was malfunctioning. It seemed fine. I moved near it and it beeped again. Then I walked away and it stayed quiet. I stood near the window, watching the street outside. I pressed my forehead against the glass. It felt cold. I saw a few lights on in the building across the way, but nobody was looking back at me. A car rolled by on the street, headlights sweeping across the sidewalk. I noticed the time on the microwave clock in the kitchen. It was 12:07 a.m. I tried not to imagine that shape behind the curtain again. I tried to push it out of my head, but my body stayed tense for a long time. That weekend, I decided to talk to some neighbors. Most people keep to themselves here, but I knocked on the door of the woman in 704. She answered, looking tired. She said she hadn't heard or seen anything strange. She did mention that the building sometimes has wiring issues, so maybe the security cameras aren't reliable. That didn't help much. I also talked to the guy in 710 at the end of the hall. He told me the building used to be a hotel decades ago, and that some rooms have weird leftover fixtures, but he hadn't experienced anything like I was describing. He looked at me like I was paranoid. I thanked him and left, feeling even more alone in this situation. When I got back to my apartment, the curtain was open again, about an inch. I dropped the mail on the table and stood there staring at that gap. My chest felt tight. I walked over and closed it. Then I checked every corner of my place. Under the bed, behind the couch, inside closets, even the utility closet in the hallway. There was nothing. The tension in my shoulders gave me a headache. I sat on the couch, rubbed my eyes, and tried to think of a logical explanation. I came up blank. I realized I was breathing fast, so I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths. I decided to leave the curtain wide open for a while just to see if it would move on its own. I left it that way and started making dinner. As I chopped some vegetables, I kept looking over at the window. The curtain stayed put. It didn't even twitch. Later that night, I tried to fall asleep. I heard soft creaking sounds in the living room, like the floorboard shifting. That's not unusual in an old building, but it made me nervous anyway. My body was on high alert. I lay in bed staring at the bedroom door. A crack of light from the street lamp outside came through the blinds, so I could see the outline of the dresser and the corner of the door frame. Everything else was dark. My heart thumped in my chest. After about an hour of lying there, I decided I couldn't stand it anymore. I got up, turned on every light in the living room, and inspected the window again. The curtain was exactly as I'd left it. My body relaxed a little. I felt stupid for panicking. But as soon as I turned to go back to bed, I heard a brushing sound against the fabric. I froze in place. I spun around, but the curtain was still. I walked up to it and looked outside. The street was quiet. The building across the way was dark. My reflection in the glass looked tired and anxious. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I almost jumped out of my skin. It was just a spam text. My hands were trembling. I turned off the lights in the living room, went back to the bedroom, and locked my door, even though that lock didn't really help. I left the lamp on by the bed and forced myself to sleep around 2 in the morning. I woke up on Saturday determined to do something more drastic. I talked to Mr. Ramos about changing the locks. He said I could at my own expense, so I bought a new lock set at a hardware store and installed it that afternoon. It made me feel a bit better, though it didn't explain how anyone could be getting in to begin with, since the caretaker insisted no one else had a key. Still, I tried everything I could. New lock, fresh seals on the windows, and even a small wedge at the base of the door to detect any forced entry. I went to bed that night feeling a little more secure. But the next day, I came back from a short trip to the grocery store, and the curtain was parted again, maybe 2 inches. I felt my throat tighten. My new lock looked untouched. The wedge was exactly where I left it. I ran to the window, yanked the curtain closed, and just stood there, holding the fabric in my fist. My heart felt like it was thumping in my throat. Then I heard a click from somewhere near the kitchen. I spun around, adrenaline rushing through my veins. I stood there for a full minute, trying to pick out any further noise. Nothing. I crept to the kitchen with my fists clenched. The fridge was humming, and that was it. I checked all my drawers, my closet, under the sink. Everything was in place. No sign of forced entry, no footprints or wet spots. No broken windows. Nothing. I walked back to the living room and sat on the couch, staring at that window. I felt a mix of fear and anger. I wanted to rip the curtain down and nail a board over the window, but I knew that wouldn't really solve anything. It would just mean I wouldn't be able to see if that shape appeared again. By now, I'm living day to day with this uneasy feeling. Every time I come home, I half expect to see that curtain pulled to the side. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. Whenever I check, there's no one there. Mr. Ramos keeps telling me no one goes up to my floor except the other residents, and they all deny messing with my place. I don't know what else to do. I've locked everything, installed sensors, checked the walls, recorded video. I've tried to stay up all night only to find no evidence besides that single shaky webcam clip. Now, every evening, the first thing I do when I walk in is look at the curtain. If it's closed, I sigh in relief. If it's open, I feel my stomach drop. I don't know what's behind it or how it keeps happening. I just know that whoever or whatever is out there is watching me. And I can't figure out how to stop it. I'm still here, though, taking it one day at a time, hoping that eventually it'll stop, or that I'll find some explanation. But so far, all I've got is a dark shape in the night, a silent curtain shifting, and a feeling in my chest that I'm not alone. And that's how things stand right now. I'm in this old 7th floor apartment, and every time that curtain moves, I freeze. I listen, I watch, and I wait. I never used to worry about my balcony door after dark. I kept it unlocked most nights and sometimes stepped out for fresh air around midnight. Now, I freeze whenever I hear the faintest tapping against the glass. It's not a constant noise. It comes and goes, irregular and unsettling, like something testing the barrier between my apartment and the open night. I still remember the first time it turned from a mild curiosity into a real source of dread. It happened on a Tuesday. I was reading on my phone, half asleep on the couch, when I heard 3 sharp knocks. They echoed through the living room. My curtains were drawn, and I didn't see anyone. The next thing I heard was heavy breathing on the other side of the door. That sound made my skin crawl. I stood up slowly, hardly daring to breathe. That was the night everything changed for me. I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment on the 10th floor of a building near the city center. The balcony faces the skyline, where I can see office towers, a few apartment blocks, and a grid of streets dotted with streetlights. At night, the city looks busy from a distance, but up close, my building gets quiet. Most people around here go to bed early, or at least they keep their windows closed. I'm one of those people who enjoyed the night breeze before all this started. Now, I don't open the door unless it's daylight. I first noticed the tapping noise about a month ago. It sounded light, like fingernails on glass, but sometimes it was so quick and faint I thought it might be a stray bird or a bat. I'd check outside and never see anything. No bird droppings, no feathers, nothing out of place. At one point, I considered that it could be the wind, maybe a loose piece of plastic from the neighboring balcony. But when I looked around in daylight, there was no loose debris, no plastic bag stuck anywhere. 1 week later, the knocks grew a bit louder. They followed the same rhythm each time. 2 or 3 taps in quick succession, then silence for a few seconds. I tried knocking back once, just to see what would happen, but there was nothing on the other side. I even stepped out onto the balcony a couple of times, shining my phone's flashlight around. My neighbors above and below never mentioned anything unusual, even though I asked them casually in the hallway if they'd heard strange noises at night. They shook their heads, said no. One guy joked about ghosts, but I just laughed it off. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Everything escalated on that Tuesday night. I was lying on my couch, scrolling through social media. I kept hearing these softer taps around 11, but I ignored them. Around midnight, I heard 3 distinct thuds. They were harder than before, more like someone knocking with a knuckle. Then came the breathing. It was slow at first, like someone out of breath, trying not to be heard. My heart started racing. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt a cold wave move through my chest. I reached for the TV remote, turned the volume down, and stayed still. I couldn't see anything because the curtains were fully drawn. But the breathing was there, heavy and deliberate. I got up carefully, not wanting to make any noise. My living room was dark, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner. I held my breath. I waited to see if the noise would fade away. Instead, I heard a soft scrape on the glass like a fingernail going down one side. Then the breathing stopped. There was another gentle tap, and then silence. After a few seconds, I decided to check. I grabbed a flashlight from a drawer in the kitchen, returned to the living room, and pulled the curtain aside a little. The balcony was empty. Nothing out there except a couple of chairs and an old potted plant. I couldn't see beyond the railing, just the dim glow of city lights below. The sky was clear, and there was a faint reflection of my living room in the glass. No sign of a person, no animals. I left the flashlight on the table and just stood there listening. I stayed up for another hour, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank, but there was no more noise that night. I went to bed around 2 in the morning feeling uneasy. When my alarm rang at 6, I woke up still tired, with a knot in my stomach. I told myself that maybe I'd overreacted. But then I remembered the breathing. There was no way I imagined that. It was too distinct, too human-like, right behind the glass. The next night, I tried to keep busy until I felt exhausted. I watched a movie with my headphones on, hoping I wouldn't hear anything. But around midnight, there it was again. First, 2 taps, then silence, then another tap. I paused the movie, took off my headphones, and listened. My heart was pounding, and my arms felt stiff. I didn't turn on any lights this time. I wanted to see if there was a silhouette outside. I approached the balcony door slowly. I stood there for a moment, hearing a faint rustling noise, like clothing brushing against the door. I pulled the curtain back a few inches and peered outside. Again, the balcony was empty, but I felt like something was just out of view, near the corners of the glass. I stood there for almost a full minute, waiting to see if anyone would move. Nothing happened. Finally, I exhaled and dropped the curtain. I started thinking that maybe the sounds were from the building's facade. Sometimes old buildings shift, or the exterior panels make noises when the temperature changes, but it didn't sound like a random creak. It sounded intentional, like knocks, and that breathing was definitely not the building settling. I decided to talk to the building's security guard. His name is Carlos. He sits in the lobby most nights checking the cameras. I went down around lunchtime so it wouldn't seem urgent or anything. I asked him if the cameras facing the front of the building or the side had caught anything unusual. He said no, just the usual foot traffic. I asked if anyone else had complained about noises on their balcony. He shook his head and said everything was normal as far as he knew. I felt uneasy, but I thanked him anyway and went back upstairs. For a few days, nothing major happened. I still heard light taps, but they were faint. Then last week I was about to go to bed around 11:30. I had just brushed my teeth, and I was in the kitchen drinking water. My kitchen window has a partial view of the balcony door if the living room lights are off. I turned off the kitchen light and the living room was dark except for the glow from a street lamp outside. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. I thought I saw a shape move across the balcony. It was quick, like a dark blur. I froze. I couldn't see its form clearly. It didn't look big, but it moved with a certain weight. I heard a click, like a fingernail tapping the railing. I stayed in place, trying to decide if I should turn on the lights or keep them off. My heart hammered in my chest. My throat felt dry. I heard a faint scuffling sound, then a soft exhale, almost like a grunt. After about 10 seconds, it went quiet. I inched closer to the living room window, trying to see if there was anything crouching near the balcony door. I couldn't see much. The reflection from inside made it hard to look out. So I stood there in the dark for a while, waiting to see if I would spot movement again. Nothing happened. Finally, I convinced myself to walk over to the door. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek. The balcony was empty again. I slid the curtain back and let out a shaky breath. At that point, I decided I wouldn't open that door at night anymore. I even considered blocking it with a piece of furniture, but then I remembered the building codes about emergency exits and stuff. I left it as it was, but I kept it locked. I started double-checking the lock before going to bed. I also started keeping my phone by my side, thinking that if I heard anything too strange, I'd call someone. But who do I call? The police? And tell them what? That I hear tapping and breathing at my balcony door? For the next few nights, the noises remained occasional. Sometimes I'd just hear a couple of faint taps and then nothing else. Other nights, there was complete silence. I tried to sleep earlier, but I felt restless. I'd jolt awake at the smallest sound, half expecting to see someone standing on the balcony staring in. Every time I dared to look, the balcony was empty. The strangest thing is that I never found footprints or any marks on the door. There's a little dust on the balcony floor, but I haven't noticed any disturbance except for a scuff here or there. I can't say for sure if those marks are new or old. I never paid attention to them before. Last night, something different happened. I was eating a late dinner around 10 p.m. when I heard a single knock on the glass. It was loud enough to make me put down my fork. I felt my stomach tighten. My arms felt cold. I stood up and turned off the kitchen light. The living room was dim, lit by a small floor lamp in the corner. I walked slowly to the balcony door and stopped about 2 feet away. I listened. I heard breathing again. It sounded ragged, like someone who had been running. I stayed absolutely still. I didn't pull the curtain back this time. I just stood there, my chest hurting from how hard my heart was beating. The breathing lasted longer than usual, maybe 15 or 20 seconds. Then it stopped. I heard a faint scratching sound, like something lightly scraping the glass from top to bottom. I wanted to say something, maybe shout, but I couldn't make a sound. My throat closed up. After another few seconds, the noise ceased. I reached out and flicked the curtain open. Nothing was there. I started to wonder if I was dealing with something else entirely, but I can't figure out what. There's no easy access to my balcony. There's no ladder outside, and it's 10 floors up. There's no adjacent building close enough for someone to jump across. The next balcony is at least 6 or 7 feet away, and even if someone managed to get onto my balcony, why would they just knock and breathe heavily? Now I'm sitting here in my living room. It's close to midnight. I haven't opened the door since this morning, and I locked it right after I stepped back in. The curtain is drawn. I have the TV on with the volume turned low. My phone is right next to me. My palms are sweating even though the air conditioner is set to a comfortable temperature. Every time I hear a slight creak or a pop from the building, my stomach drops. I keep playing out scenarios in my head. I wonder if there's a person who found a way onto my balcony and is messing with me. But there's no direct route from the roof or from the ground. I considered the possibility of an animal, but that doesn't explain the 3 distinct knocks or the heavy breathing. It also doesn't explain the shape I saw that night. I just know that it moved quickly and was gone the moment I turned on a light. I don't feel safe opening the balcony door at night anymore. I only open it in the morning when there's sunlight, and even then, I check first. I step out and scan every inch of the balcony. I look over the railing to see if there's anything suspicious on the building walls or ledges. I never find anything. Everything looks normal in the daylight. I've thought about installing a camera out there, but part of me is afraid to see what it might record. Another part of me thinks it might not even catch anything, and then I'd be back to square one, feeling uneasy every night. I haven't told many people about this. My parents live in another state, and if I share this with them, they'll worry. My friends would probably say I'm stressed or that I should move. But moving costs money, and I'm not sure this kind of thing wouldn't follow me somewhere else. It might be nothing. It might just be my imagination. But I don't think so. Not after hearing that heavy, labored breathing. It was too real. So now I'm waiting. I'm on edge every evening, listening for that tapping. I've gotten into the habit of turning off the lights around midnight and standing by the door, just to see if I can catch whoever, or whatever, is out there. But all I've caught so far is the echo of my own heartbeat. At least for now, there's no broken glass, no forced entry. There's just a locked door and a curtain between me and the balcony. That's enough to keep me from looking outside at night. Maybe one day I'll figure out what's going on. Until then, I guess I'll just keep the door locked and hope the knocking never becomes something worse. That old radio won't stop making noise. It doesn't matter if I unplug it or throw it in a ditch. Somehow it ends up back in the same spot, playing low static after midnight. That's how things have been since I moved here. I thought I'd settle on my dad's old ranch without complications, but I was wrong. Now I'm caught up with this piece of junk that won't stay quiet. I drove in on a Monday afternoon because I'd been putting off dealing with the ranch for too long. The place hadn't changed on the outside. The main house was still the same old building with chipped paint and sagging porch steps. The roof looked okay, but I didn't trust it. The ground around the porch had weeds up to my knees. I felt sweat gathering on my forehead because it was hot and humid. There was a faint smell of manure and old hay, but I was used to it. I grew up in this area, so that odor reminded me of times I'd rather not think about. I headed straight for the barn because I wanted to check if the structure was still sound. My dad spent a lot of time in that barn. He kept a radio there on an old workbench. He used to listen to country music while tinkering with small projects. I had no special attachment to that radio, but seeing it again gave me a strange feeling. It looked older than I remembered. The plastic casing was yellowish and the antenna was bent. I ran my hand over the top to wipe off some dust. The dial was stuck between two channels, so I fiddled with it for a second. Static crackled through the speaker. I unplugged it from the outlet in the corner. Then I left it on the workbench and went back to the house. After hauling my bags inside, I opened all the windows. The interior smelled stale. No one had cleaned up in a long time. My sister and I hadn't decided what we would do with the ranch. We weren't even sure if we'd sell it or keep it. For now, it was just my job to sort out the furniture, the garage, and everything else. She lived in another state and would only come down if I needed her. I felt tired. I grabbed a bottle of water from a cooler I brought and drank half of it in one go. Then I noticed I had no service on my phone. That wasn't unusual out here. I just shrugged and put the phone back in my pocket. That first night, everything was quiet until around 1 in the morning. I had dozed off on the couch because I was too lazy to set up the bedroom properly. A faint crackling noise woke me up. It was so soft I thought it was my imagination. I listened carefully. It sounded like static mixed with a country song. I knew that sound. It was my dad's old radio station. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. The living room was dark. The only light came from the moon through the window. The noise was coming from outside. I figured maybe I had forgotten to unplug something, but I was sure I unplugged the radio before leaving the barn. I walked out barefoot and headed toward the barn. The grass was damp. My heart was beating faster than normal, but I kept going. I slid the barn door open. The overhead light wasn't working, so I used my phone's flashlight. The radio was on the workbench, glowing faintly. The dial's needle twitched. Low static came from the speaker. I glanced at the outlet. The cord was dangling off the bench, not connected to anything. I swallowed hard. I told myself it had to be some leftover battery or an internal capacitor storing charge. I had no idea how electronics worked, so I decided not to freak out yet. I picked up the radio, turned the knob until it clicked off. It fell silent. I put it back on the bench. I felt a bit shaky as I closed the barn door. I went back to the house, locked everything, and forced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck. My back hurt from that couch. I made a quick breakfast and went to the barn to see if the radio was still unplugged. It was silent when I got there. I picked it up, carried it outside, and dropped it in an old trash bin. I didn't plan on fixing it, and I didn't want that static at night. I had things to do, like cleaning out the house and checking the fences. I spent most of the day hauling trash and sorting through boxes in the house. I found some old photographs, papers, and random stuff that my dad never threw away. Nothing felt too personal. He hadn't been a sentimental man. In the afternoon, I tried to get a call out to my sister. My phone signal was weak, so I drove a few miles down the road to a spot where I knew I could get a decent connection. I told her I was planning to stay at the ranch for a few more days. She said she was fine with that and asked if anything was weird. I hesitated but ended up telling her about the radio. I asked if she had taken it out of the trash or if she'd visited the ranch recently. She said no. She sounded confused. I told her it was probably nothing. I ended the call feeling uneasy. When I got back to the ranch, I checked the barn again. My stomach tightened when I saw the radio sitting on the workbench. It looked exactly like before. Same layer of dust, same bent antenna. I stared at it for a while. Then I tapped on it, picked it up, and turned the knob. Static came out. I shut it off again. My hands were shaking a bit. I remember feeling frustrated. It made no sense that a radio I'd thrown in the trash would be back in the barn. I left the barn and locked it with a heavy padlock. That lock was old, but it still worked. I yanked on the door twice to make sure it was secure. I tried to focus on other tasks. I swept the house, bagged more junk, and made a quick dinner. My mind kept drifting back to that radio. I started wondering if I was mixing up the location of the trash bin. Maybe I'd used a bin inside the barn without remembering it. I blamed it on stress. I told myself I was just spooked because the ranch felt lonely. At around midnight, I got ready to sleep in my old bedroom. I left a lamp on because I didn't like how the darkness felt. Around 1 a.m, I heard it again. Low static and a faint tune. I sat up, heart pounding. I tried to ignore it for a moment, hoping it would stop, but it kept going. The barn was locked, so I wondered if the sound was coming from another radio. I got out of bed, put on some pants, and grabbed a flashlight. My mouth was dry, so I took a swig of water on the way out. When I reached the barn door, the padlock was still in place. I shined my flashlight through a gap in the boards. I saw a weak glow inside, exactly where the workbench stood. The static got louder when I pressed my ear against the wooden wall. I felt sweat on the back of my neck. I fumbled with the lock, managed to unlock it, and slid the door open just a crack. The radio's light was pulsing. I could hear a country melody under the static. I didn't recognize the song. It didn't sound like a typical station broadcast. The words were garbled, and the music was slow and distant. I stepped inside, keeping the flashlight trained on the radio. My pulse throbbed in my ears. The radio crackled with a low hiss. When I approached it, the volume dipped, almost like it sensed me. I reached out and turned the knob off. It clicked and went silent again. I unplugged it, though it was never plugged in, and carried it outside. I locked the barn behind me and walked around until I found a fire pit my dad used to use for burning yard waste. I set the radio down on the ground. I felt silly, but I grabbed a hammer from a toolbox nearby. I smashed the radio a couple of times until the plastic cracked. The speaker popped out. The dial fell off. I felt a rush of adrenaline. Then I dropped the hammer and tossed the broken pieces into the fire pit. There was no wood or flame yet, but I planned to burn it the next day. I wiped my forehead. I couldn't believe I was going this far, but I didn't want to see that radio in one piece again. Then I walked back inside, washed my hands, and tried to sleep. I felt exhausted. The next morning I woke up early. The first thing on my mind was the fire pit. I rushed out to check. It was empty. No broken parts, no plastic casing, no wires. I looked around the fire pit, thinking maybe some animals dragged the pieces away. I didn't see any fragments. My chest felt tight. I checked inside the barn again. The radio was there, back on the bench, looking like it always did. No cracks, no dents. The dial was in place. The antenna was still bent. I stood there, breathing heavily, feeling my stomach twist. I felt a chill even though the morning sun was warm. I moved closer and touched it. The surface felt cold. I turned it on. Static. I clicked it off again. I backed away, locked the barn one more time, and went to the house to calm down. I managed to call my sister again. I told her I didn't want to sound crazy, but the radio kept reappearing. I tried explaining what happened. She asked if I was sleeping well. She suggested I might be exhausted and just misplacing stuff. I told her that was impossible because I'd smashed the radio. She didn't believe me. She said maybe I destroyed a different radio, or maybe I hallucinated. I snapped at her, then apologized. I ended the call feeling frustrated and alone. I walked around the property for a while to clear my head. I checked the fences, took note of some damaged sections, and planned to fix them. I thought about the possibility of a neighbor sneaking in as a prank, but I didn't have any neighbors within a mile. My closest neighbor was an older man who wouldn't bother with something like this. That night, I sat in the kitchen with the lights on, waiting. I felt my eyes droop around midnight, but I forced myself to stay awake. At exactly 1 in the morning, I heard the static again. It wasn't loud. It was more like a distant whisper. I looked out the kitchen window. The barn was dark, but I knew the radio was on. My heartbeat thumped against my chest. I stayed put for a minute, breathing slowly. Then I stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked outside. The grass felt cool under my boots. The air smelled like damp soil. I reached the barn door and listened. The static was there, faint and crackling. I didn't unlock the barn this time. I just stood there. My thoughts felt scrambled. I wanted to stop hearing that noise. I wanted a normal night without that radio humming in the dark. After a while, I walked back to the house and shut the door. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about how that radio turned on by itself. I thought about how it never stayed destroyed or thrown away. I wondered if it would ever stop. My stomach felt tight and I had a dull headache. Eventually, I dozed off near dawn. When I woke up, I checked the barn again. It was quiet. The radio was still there, looking ordinary. I stared at it for a moment, then turned around and left. I started packing my things because I wanted to get away for a while. I stuffed clothes and personal items into my truck. Before leaving, I stood in front of the barn door, considering if I should do anything else. In the end, I left it locked. As I drove away, I felt a knot in my throat. I was leaving the ranch, but I knew that radio would still be there, humming after midnight like it always did. I didn't know how to explain it. I wasn't sure if it was something that made sense. All I knew was that every time I tried to get rid of it, it came back. The crackle of static and that faint country tune wouldn't leave me alone. At that point, I decided I needed a break. I had done my part by sorting through the ranch. My sister could hire someone if there was more to do. I wanted no part in that radio's weird routine. I drove down the dusty road, watching the rearview mirror. I couldn't hear the static anymore. I reached the highway and kept going until the ranch was far behind me. The radio stayed in that barn, and I don't know if it still crackles at night. I assume it does. I didn't want to spend another minute alone with it. That's the story of why I left so quickly. That's why I don't plan on going back anytime soon. If my sister wants to deal with that radio, she can. I'm done with it. I've lived in this condominium for 2 years. It's right next to an old cemetery, separated only by a tall concrete wall. People always ask me if that bothers me. At first I shrugged and said it didn't. I heard a few voices from the other side at night, but I assumed there were legitimate reasons for them. Maybe late-night visits or some staff working. Then I started hearing low laughter and soft moans at odd hours, times when I knew there shouldn't be any ceremonies. One night I found a withered flower on my balcony. I had no clue how it got there. I picked it up, tried to toss it away, and it crumbled into ash in my hand. That's when I realized something wasn't right. I live on the second floor of a 5-story building. My balcony overlooks the cemetery wall. During the day, it looks normal enough. Sometimes I hear a lawnmower from the groundskeeper who takes care of the grass. I see crows perched on the top of the wall once in a while. There's a big iron gate at the entrance of the cemetery. People come and go. Everything seems peaceful in the daylight. At night, it's different. I've been sitting in my living room with the lights off, trying to watch TV or read a book, and I'll hear someone speak on the other side of the wall. The voice sounds low and mumbled. I usually convince myself it's just someone paying respects, or maybe an older caretaker walking around. But there have been times I've heard laughter that isn't pleasant. It sounds breathy and short, like someone trying to stifle it. I've also heard a slow, drawn-out moan that makes my skin crawl. It doesn't sound like a person in pain. It sounds off. I can't explain it well, but it raises the hairs on the back of my neck. The first time I found something that truly alarmed me was about a month ago. I woke up one morning, opened the balcony door, and saw a wilted rose in a small puddle of water near my outdoor chair. It looked like it had been sitting there for a while, but it hadn't rained that night. I didn't see any footprints or signs that someone climbed over. The wall is almost 8 feet high, and there's no reason for anyone to scale it. I picked up the rose, planning to toss it in the trash. The moment I gripped the stem, it felt cold, like it had just come out of a freezer. I carried it to the kitchen trash can, but when I opened my hand, it disintegrated into a fine gray powder. It made me jump back in surprise, and I ended up spilling some of that powder on the floor. I had to sweep it up and wipe down the spot. I didn't smell anything unusual. It just looked like ash. I tried to forget about it, but the image stuck in my mind. That evening, I sat on my couch, stared at the wall, and listened. I heard the usual faint sounds. They were too soft to understand. Around midnight, I was in bed trying to sleep, and I heard a quick burst of laughter. It sounded like a man's voice. It stopped as soon as I got up to check. I peered out my window into the darkness, but all I saw was the top of the wall and some tree branches behind it. I couldn't see into the cemetery because of the angle. I told myself maybe a couple of guys were walking by the outside of the cemetery or something. I returned to bed. Over the next week, the sounds became more frequent. I found myself waking up around 2 or 3 in the morning. Sometimes it was laughter. Sometimes it was a single moan. Once I heard what I thought was a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded close, like someone was standing right on the other side of the wall, speaking toward my building. Every time I worked up the courage to step onto my balcony to listen, everything went silent. One night I decided to record the sounds on my phone. I turned off all the lights in my apartment, slid the glass door open, and stood on my balcony. I held my phone out and recorded for about 10 minutes. I caught maybe 1 or 2 faint noises, but nothing conclusive. It was just a low hum and the occasional rustling of wind. The next day, I listened back with headphones. My heart pounded as I leaned in close, trying to catch any detail. There was a short moment where I thought I heard a breathy exhale. It was so soft I wasn't even sure if it was just interference. After that, I promised myself I'd be more direct. If I heard something again, I'd try to see if anyone was actually in the cemetery at night. The problem is the entrance gate is locked after 6 p.m. I don't have any right to go inside after hours. There's a small caretaker's office near the front. I could have asked him, but I felt weird bringing it up. Hey, I keep hearing spooky noises at night. Can I do a nighttime patrol? That would sound ridiculous. Still, the next time I saw the caretaker during the day, I asked if he worked late or if there were any official nighttime funerals or vigils. He laughed it off and said no. He told me the cemetery closed to the public at dusk, and he usually left by 7 p.m. He hadn't heard about anyone sneaking in. Then he shrugged and said, people sometimes jump the walls. He said there have been cases of teenagers hanging around, but he never caught them. That made me think it was just kids messing around. Maybe they were the ones leaving random flowers. That idea calmed me down a bit. I figured I'd just keep an eye out and maybe scare off a few teenagers if they got too loud. But then I started finding more strange items on my balcony. A couple of wilted daisies, a single white lily with brown spots on its petals, and at one point, a small bunch of crushed leaves that looked like someone had torn them off a potted plant. Every single time, they were cold to the touch, and they crumbled into ash as soon as I tried to dispose of them. It always happened in the morning. I never saw them appear during the night. I'd go to bed, wake up, step outside, and find something new. I wanted to catch whoever was doing this. I set up a small motion detector camera near my balcony door, angled it so it would record most of the outdoor space. I synced it to my phone so I'd get an alert if it captured movement. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third night, I woke up around 4 a.m. to check my phone. I hadn't received any alerts, so I went back to sleep. In the morning, I stepped outside and found a wilted chrysanthemum under the chair. I felt a jolt of panic when I saw it. I opened the camera footage. There was no motion recorded. It showed me going out on the balcony before bed and then me coming out in the morning. No one else appeared. The flower just showed up without any explanation. I started feeling uneasy every time I walked through my living room after dark. I kept looking at the balcony door, half expecting a face to appear. My skin got clammy, and my heart beat faster every time I thought I heard a noise outside. Usually it was just the hum of the refrigerator or the plumbing in the walls, but I was always on edge. About a week ago, I woke up in the middle of the night again. It was around 2:30 a.m. The air felt too cold for that time of year. I was sweating but shivering at the same time. I checked the thermostat and saw it read 71 degrees. It made no sense to me because it felt much colder. Then I heard that faint laughter again. This time, it lasted longer. It sounded like someone right outside my window, muffled and soft, but it went on for maybe a full minute. I sat up in bed and waited for my phone's camera alert. Nothing arrived. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand, tiptoed across my dark apartment, and slid open the balcony door just enough to peek out. I heard a light scraping sound, like someone dragging something against the wall on the cemetery side. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the railing. I saw nothing. I leaned over the edge, trying to see the base of the wall. It was too dark. I stared out toward the top of the wall. For a second, I thought I saw a shape move. It might have been a shadow or a branch swaying in the wind. I felt a tight knot in my stomach and decided it was best to shut the door. I locked it, double-checked the windows, and went back to bed. The next morning, I inspected my balcony. No flowers, no ash, no footprints. It looked clean. But when I knelt down near the railing, I noticed a small patch of dust that looked darker than the usual buildup. I touched it, and it felt gritty, almost like sand. It didn't smell like anything, and it blew away with a light brush of my hand. I couldn't figure out where it came from. Over the next few days, my sleep schedule got worse. I'd stay up late, alert for any sign of movement or noise. I'd fall asleep around midnight or 1 a.m. and wake up exhausted for work. My coworkers noticed I was jittery and distracted. One of them asked if I was going through something personal. I just said I was dealing with neighbor noise at night. I didn't mention it was coming from a cemetery. 2 nights ago, I decided to pull a chair out onto the balcony and sit there in the dark. I put on a hoodie, brought my phone, and turned off the indoor lights so I wouldn't stand out. Around 1 a.m., I heard a faint scraping noise again. Then I heard a low hum like someone humming a tune. I couldn't recognize any melody. The sound rose and fell, then faded. My hands got clammy, and my mouth went dry. I looked over the railing again, shining a small flashlight. I thought I saw a hand gripping the top of the wall, but it vanished so fast that I wasn't sure if I imagined it. I felt my pulse racing. My stomach twisted up and I almost dropped the flashlight. I rushed back inside and locked the door. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I waited, listening for any more noises. After a few minutes of silence, I forced myself to calm down. I walked to my bedroom, lay in bed, and just stared at the ceiling until I fell asleep. In the morning, there was nothing on the balcony. No flower, no dust, no sign of anyone being there. My camera didn't capture anything either. Now I'm left with this sense of constant unease. I have no explanation for the laughter, the moans, or the weird withered flowers that turn to ash. I've considered moving out, but that's a big step. My lease isn't up for another few months, and I don't want to break it without a solid reason. But I'm concerned about my well-being. Every night I wait for something else to happen. I can't say for sure what's out there. I only know I've heard sounds no one can explain, and I've seen things appear on my balcony without any logical way for them to get there. Something is happening by that wall, and it doesn't feel right. I'm not sleeping well, and I'm constantly tense. My body feels heavier, and I catch myself jumping at small noises like the elevator door in the hallway. I'm stuck in this place, living next to a cemetery that doesn't stay quiet at night. I don't know who or what is making those sounds. Maybe it's a prank. Maybe it's something I can't explain. All I know is I never feel fully alone after sunset anymore. My balcony faces that graveyard, and I can't ignore it. Every time I close my eyes at night, I half expect to hear that raspy laughter again, or find another dead flower waiting for me in the morning. And every time I step outside, I feel the wall looming over me, hiding whatever is on the other side. I don't know if I'll ever get used to it. I just want to sleep through one night without waking up in a cold sweat, sure that someone is standing outside looking in. For now, I wait, listening to the silence, never sure how long it'll last before I hear something I can't explain.